Please switch on the mic. Testing. Good morning, members. This is the public hearing session of the Subcommittee on Retirement Protection. Just yesterday, the government has announced the proposal. So this meeting is very meaningful now, because otherwise, without the government's proposal, we won't know what to discuss. The paper has just been tabled, so please refer to the papers. We have 103 deputations attending this session, this meeting, and it will be conducted in 3 sessions. The first session will end at 10:45, and the second session will end at 12:35, and the last session is expected to end at about 2:45. Thank you. As the administration is coming in, I'd like to ask members that as the term of this subcommittee is coming to an end, I'd like to consult members on your views whether we should extend the work of this subcommittee. So, should we just hold the last meeting, or should we extend the subcommittee extension? Please, Dr. K.K. Kwok. Okay, right, your views are heard. Mr. Tommy Cheung. Well, to put it short, Dr. K.K. Kwok suggests it should be extended. We oppose it. Mr. Yu Si-wing, I think we can explore extending the term, because there are so many issues to explore. Mr. Leung Yu-chung, then if somebody opposes, then I am in favor of the suggestion. I see that many members are familiar with the deputations, and you're greeting with the deputations. Well, Ma'am Clerk, I see that members have turned their heads to greet the deputations. So, in short, those in favor of extending the work of the subcommittee, would you please put up your hands? 5, noted. Who oppose the extension of this subcommittee, please raise your hand. Just Mr. Tommy Cheung and another member. All right, so 5-2, 5 in favor, 2 against. So I'm going to extend the subcommittee and raise it with the House Committee, and I'll see how this will be dealt with at the House Committee.
Okay. 好，唔該晒。
Thank you. And I thank the deputations for the first session for coming to the Legislative Council to express your views on the abolition of the offsetting mechanism under the MPF system. I think that if you need an earpiece to hear, please use the earpiece in front of you. You can adjust the volume and choose the channel you like. Channel 0 is the floor, Channel 1 is Cantonese, Channel 2 is English, and Channel 3 is Putonghua. When you speak, you have a time limit of 3 minutes because we have so many deputations today. Please observe the time limit and please keep watch of the time. And when your 3 minutes is up, then you will have to stop. And when you speak, please do not code mix, or it will be difficult for interpreters. The administration has submitted the paper CB bracket 21671/1617 bracket 01. So, Secretary, would you like to walk us through the paper? But we do have a very tight schedule, so please be as succinct as possible. I'll try to finish it in 2 minutes. I'll just highlight some salient points. You may recall that in this year's policy address, the government has announced some specific proposals on progressively abolishing the offsetting of severance payment, SP, and long service payment, LSP, with the MPF system. And we have engaged employers and employees and other stakeholders in active dialogue and detailed discussions. And we've strived to gain their support. And meanwhile, in the community, there are different alternatives proposed. And we've tried to conduct analyses and continue to exchange with stakeholders. Over the past few months, we have made the best effort because, as you may be aware, even towards the last weeks of this administration, we're still doing our best. And I can feel that both sides have adopted a more friendly attitude. Regrettably, neither employers or employees are receptive to the government's proposal, nor then can they agree among themselves on any alternative that is acceptable to both sides. Having analyzed the whole situation, at this moment, the government finds the original proposal as the best option. Yesterday, at the Executive Council meeting, several points were raised. First, the government reaffirms the policy direction of progressively abolishing the offsetting of SP and LSP against MPF, and the government's original proposal will form a foundation for furthering the handling of this issue. I think that you're familiar with the original proposal. I'd just like to highlight some salient points. There are several elements. First, the offsetting arrangement after abolition will have no retrospective effect. In other words, accrued benefits from employers' MPF contributions before the effective date will be grandfathered. This is like drawing a line, and as the LSP may be overlapping with the MPF in terms of its function, we're going to slightly adjust downwards the SP-LSP payable from the existing entitlement of 2/3 to 50%, and we also recommend a government subsidy for 10 years to shoulder the burden of SMEs in paying SP-LSP. Regrettably, at this moment, both employers and employees still hold divergent views on the government's proposal and the various alternatives. And even for alternatives, they have yet to reach any consensus. But I'd like to take this opportunity to appeal to all sides that, first of all, we acknowledge the efforts of all sides, including employer and employee representatives, for their hard work. And as you can see, we have made progress from discussing principles in the past to discussing specific proposals, and they have all adopted a more friendly attitude, and we have had pragmatic and rational discussions. For employers and employees in the past few months, they have been able to have a more focused discussion on progressively abolishing the offsetting mechanism. But of course, both sides still hold on to their principles. We nevertheless believe that they have come up with a more friendly attitude, and they have also made some concrete suggestions on the alternatives, and they have created room for further discussions. This is our interim achievement, and to further take forward this complex and long-standing problem, we have laid a good foundation. Having heard all the views and having considered all the alternatives, we believe that the government's original proposal is the best option for the following reasons. We believe that the original proposal It's a fine balance for the three sides, that is employers, employees, and the government. That means each will have to pay extra costs or make some concessions, and the consequence is largely bearable for all three parties. And we have the grandfathering arrangement and 10-year government subsidy, which provides a sufficiently long buffer period for employers to adapt to the policy change and make preparation. As for employees, apart from fully preserving employers' mandatory MPF contributions for retirement, they will also receive a reasonable compensation in case of SP-LSP dismissals for better protection. So the original proposal would definitely allow employees to enjoy more benefits or rights than the current arrangement. Third point, it is focused, requiring only employers with SP-LSP dismissals to pay more, while the majority of employers will not be affected. And overall speaking, the additional cost will be manageable by most sectors. And the fourth point is that it is the most cost-effective option for society, and we can also settle the offsetting issue once and for all. We understand that it is a great challenge for both employers and employees to settle the offsetting issue. And the government has made its best effort and shown its greatest sincerity in mediating between employers and employees. We understand that there will be additional burden on SMEs. That is why the government has adopted this unprecedented initiative to provide a 10-year government subsidy of $7.9 billion for employers. At the same time, we also want to safeguard employees' rights while considering SMEs' affordability. Over the past few months, we have had a constructive and rational discussion, and we have also conducted a large volume of analysis on and research on different proposals. We hope that this will be conducive to facilitating exchange between employers and employees. We also hope that they can also seek common ground. Well, Secretary, you said that you would speak for 2 minutes, but you spoke for 7 to 8 minutes already.
Well, I still allowed you to continue, but then you said that after listening to so many views in the past, you would still be willing to listen today. Well, I'd like to remind all of you that you will not be covered by the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance protection, and we have a guideline table before you, so please note that. So first, Ms. Chow Yun-man. Good morning. I'm from the Civic Party, and my name is Chow Yun-man. According to the Bureau Director, well, he worked very hard for a long time, but then most of us could see that you've been working very hard only during the past fortnight, and we only have 7 days to go before the end of this term of government, and this is a sunset government, and yet the EXCO has been having many meetings shortly before the end of its term. So is it really for the benefit of the workers, or is it because you're trying to save your face? So I think all you're doing is to come up with a list of your achievements, and so for your own name, you're trying to sacrifice the interests of over 1 million workers. So is it that Hong Kong people can be pressed like that? Well, the way that you're doing things, you've been doing that so hastily. All right, last time Matthew Cheung came out to say that there's a package, and yesterday you came up to announce another package, and you've been working on that for over 5 weeks, and still you hadn't been able to achieve anything. So is it that the executive can just make any decision it likes? Well, coming back to this issue, the Civic Party is against this proposal. There are 3 main reasons. First, there is no retrospectivity. All right, you promised that you promised to do that for 5 years, and you're doing this at the 11th hour, and you're also going to draw a line, and so is clearly demarcated, and still you haven't come to a decision on which is the dividing line, and you just doing this arbitrarily. So this is really quite a hasty job. And also with regard to the calculation, you're going to reduce it from 2/3 to half. So I think you're putting the cart before the horse, because with regard to the cash subsidy, is just to relieve the pressure from the short-term unemployment difficulty, and now you're trying to help the employer, and you're actually saying that they have been doing a great job, and they are willing to do this for their employees' benefit. In fact, this is not the case. And thirdly, you talk about the 10-year transitional period or grace period. Okay, for a high school student, he would have completed his university education. So why does the employer need 10 years? And you are also giving them $7.9 million as topping up. But then every year they are offsetting some $3 billion. So by the time of the 10-year period, what if the $7.9 billion is not enough? Are you going to top it up again? So we don't know how you came up with those figures, and you're actually inclined in favor of the business sector, and you're trying to suppress the employees. That's why the Civic Party will be strongly against it. Next, Ms. Lee Ching-yi. Good morning, everyone. I'm from the Catholic Labour Committee. Well, the administration should be working for raw quarters of the community, and the employment ordinance or the MPF system should be protecting everyone. But then apparently the employees have been shortchanged. They have not been given any importance at all. But then for the offsetting arrangement, original is an unjust system. It should have been scrapped a long time ago. And yet you're actually withdrawing from that. And for the low-income earners, actually they will be hard hit, because for the low-income workers, they do not have to make any contribution at all if they are earning less than $7,100 a month. And for many times they have been made use of by the offsetting arrangement, and the employers have been exploiting them. And according to the workers that we came into contact with, well, they've been working for a long time, but then because of the outsourced contractors, and they change very frequently, and as a result of the frequent offsetting arrangement, they would not be getting anything out of their MPF accounts, and in the end they might only be able to get some $20,000-$30,000. So they are very hard hit, and now you're actually affecting them, in particular the low-income workers. And also, if you look at the figures, well, actually the offset figure has been rising. Well, from in 2016 and 17, for the amount that has been used to offset, we're talking about over 10 billion. We're talking about over $1 billion, and that would involve all those who would be eligible for that, and that would account for some 28% of those who are eligible, and the figures have been rising during the past 3 years. And if you just look at 2016, some 50,000 workers have been affected. So the situation is not going to go away by dragging your feet. So we are very angry about this, because yesterday the Executive Council had an 11th-hour meeting, and then they took a decision at the last minute. So this is not going to resolve the problems that I just set out. And also, if you just draw a line to scrap the offsetting arrangement, and it will take 30-40 years before the entire society can digest it, because that cannot help solve the problem at its root, because the fundamental problem will take 30-40 years before the community can digest it, and in the interim, workers will continue to suffer, and they will have to change their years of service before we can really have a society where there is no offsetting arrangement. And that would also affect the capital, the free capitalization scheme, because every dollar and cent will be placed in the executive authorities. Yes. I'm from the Baptist University. I'm a student. Well, just 2 or 3 months ago, according to the CNS department, well, it announced a rather shocking figure because for Gini coefficient, it already rose to 0.539. Well, for the grassroots in Hong Kong, it meant that the wealth gap has widened and they are actually suffering very badly. And in year 2000, the MPF system was introduced, and before that, the employers were reluctantly forced to embrace this severance pay and also long service payment mechanism. And yesterday they announced the scrapping of it, but then there were no details, and they said that for the 2/3 calculation formula, it would be it would be reduced to 1/2, and it's very much inclined in favor of the employers. And CY Leung is trying to claim that he had already honored his pledge before the end of his term. This is totally unacceptable. And what I like to say is that well, we had the security guards and also cleaners making complaints because by the end of the contract, they are trying to cut the wages, or they are just offering some 60% of the severance payment, and both employees and employers' interests would suffer. And on top of that, as a top city in Asia, the security guards are actually cheated by being exploited in terms of working hours and so on. And all they want is to have a proper retirement protection, and for the offset amounts, they want it because they like to have better retirement protection. And yet, for so many years, the employers have already made a profit of at least $32 billion. And yet, at the same time, well, the wealth gap has been growing, and the workers have been living from hand to mouth. And for the employers, they're enjoying air conditioning in their huge offices. And how come the administration is still supporting the employers? And how come you are still introducing this 10-year grace period for the scrapping of the offsetting arrangement? You said that you're protecting the workers, and yet why are you reducing the ratio of the offsetting ratio? So you're actually favoring the employers. You are increasing the wealth gap. So is it that the workers will have to lose their pride before you are prepared to scrap it altogether? I think we should set up a proper and comprehensive retirement protection mechanism. We should scrap the offsetting arrangement. We should have universal retirement protection. Thank you. Next, Ms. Cheng Lai Ha. Thank you. For 16 years, the offsetting arrangement has already meant that the workers have lost some $32 billion, and until now the administration has never been able to scrap it. But then it's flawed with a lot of loopholes, and there is no protection, and as a result the workers' MPF accounts would suffer. And you're actually trying to scrap severance payment and LSP, so you're actually trying to adopt a band-aid approach, and by plugging a loophole here, you're actually creating another elsewhere. So this is not a good proposal. So scrapping it altogether is to set things right. So you should not have exchanged it with lowering the ratio. At least there are 5 principles that you should have adhered to. Number 1, you should not reduce severance payment and long service payment for us, and you should not be subsidizing the employers. And when the employer dismiss employees, there should be proper severance payment and long service payment, and the employers should take up the share because they are dismissing their employees unreasonably. And also in scrapping the offsetting arrangement, all the employers' contribution should have been kept intact. So according to the principles that I set out, the 3rd principle is the most important, because this is a statutory compensation mechanism. Other than those who are dismissing, well, for the workers who have been laid off, they would get relief, and that would also reduce the incentive for employers to lay off their employees. if you scrap it, then the employers do not have to pay any cost in laying off their employees, and there would be no protection for the workers, and the implications can be far-reaching. We've already come up with a suggestion. It's very detailed, and that would cover the following points. So first of all, we need to set up a fund which is contributed by both employers and employees, and once you contribute into that fund, you would not be allowed to use that to offset your MPF contribution, and the employer can apply to get a payback from the fund after he has given or offered LSP or SP to his employees, and also after the line has been drawn, he can also withdraw half of that amount from that account. Last but not least, it cannot replace the universal retirement protection mechanism, and 60% of the community support a universal retirement protection. I hope that the new chief executive will be bold enough in introducing this, and he should also scrap it altogether immediately. Next, since July 2012 to now, some $32 billion has been offset under this mechanism. This should be scrapped immediately. The administration should inject money, and then employers should make contribution to this fund in order to protect employees for their protection, and also for redundancy. The administration should not sacrifice the interests of the employees, because at the time when they are laid off, they should receive protection for their income. That should not be used in exchange, or that should not be offset in exchange for MPF protection, because paying LSP and SP to their employees is the responsibility of the employers. And if you allow them to, or if you subsidize them, that would reduce the incentive, and the employers must pay their employees properly when they lay them off, so that they would think twice. And also for those who dismiss their employees unreasonably, they should also pay the cost, or else this would only condone to the acts of the unscrupulous employers. And also in scrapping the arrangement, you should also consider those with long years of service. Because of the scrapping of the offsetting arrangement and there is no retrospectivity, most of their years of service will just be ignored, and that would not be fair to them. And therefore we suggest that before scrapping the offsetting arrangement, 50% of the SP or LSP can be withdrawn from that fund. And in whatever form you're trying to scrap the offsetting arrangement, some $50 billion should be used to introduce the universal retirement protection, which is supported by 60% of the community, instead of trying to subsidize the employers in dismissing their employees. And with regard to the proposed fund, we should set it up as soon as possible, and we should scrap the offsetting arrangement as soon as possible, so that workers' interests will not be affected, and we should not be using government money to support or to subsidize employers in laying off their employees. Employers should pay the cost, and we should also keep most of the accumulated benefits for employees in order to protect their interests. And there should also be universal retirement protection without any means test. I hope that the new term of government will not be forgetful or try to selectively forget its promises. There should be no offsetting arrangement. Next. Well, since the 70s and 80s, we've already put in place the SP and LSP system. And before the introduction of the MPF mechanism, well, during the previous 20, 30 years, nobody ever mentioned that employers were going to take up this responsibility, and there were no problems whatsoever. So I don't know whether or not the Lion Rock Institute had been founded yet. All right, the administration is pledging that some $7.9 billion will be put put in place to support the employers in scrapping the arrangement, and now in exchange you're trying to reduce the calculation ratio from 2/3 to 1.5, and also there is also no retrospectivity after the line is drawn, and you're going to spend some $7.9 billion in exchange for the business sector's compromise, and yet these are very harsh terms. So I don't know whether or not the administration has considered this issue. In fact, from what we have seen, you're going to date it back to 10 years, and on the face of it, as C.Y. Leung put it yesterday, or Matthew Cheung put it yesterday, in 2 or 3 years' time when you're able to roll it out. So let's say it's going to lose effect in 2030, so by 2029. So it's like the social welfare scheme. So before the lump sum payment system was introduced, some NGOs would just lay off all their employees, and then they would sign a new contract altogether. So what will the government do? Will $7.9 billion be enough, or will it cost the government some $79 billion? Because there are some unscrupulous enterprises out there. Because even in the welfare sector, we also have some unscrupulous NGOs that resorted to this sort of practice. So will some unscrupulous employers just lay off all their employees? So with this new arrangement, I think this is neither here nor there. So when compared to the introduction of the offsetting arrangement under the MPF mechanism during the colonial era, they tried to introduce this, and as an exchange, they try to allow the business sector to do this. In fact, in the end, it's the workers or employees who are going to suffer. Well, before you speak, the administration would like to respond to some of the remarks that have been made. Well, honestly, there is no time limit on individual speakers, because even if we do not take any break, we are already overrunning. So by the second or third session, we will only be able to open the floor to members' questions. So please remember to come back, because in the second and third session, we still need a quorum before we can start. Okay, next, Ms. Ip Mei Yong. Thank you, Chairman. Indeed, we urge the government officials who are here to listen. So it's not just about listening, because you are really high-paid officials. And we all know that we've been talking about offsetting, and there are people who are against it and people who are in favor. But you sounded very serious when you talked about it. But then, come to think of it, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when Hong Kong's economy kicked off, well, the grassroots workers did not have any MPF protection, and you're forcing the elders to come out to talk about the offsetting arrangement under the MPF system. This is really ironic.
Why not be direct and simple and support universal pensions as a kind of assurance for those who worked so hard in the past, and yet today we're still talking about how we should use the money and how much we've lost. Elderly people like us, like me, and also those who are collecting cardboard boxes on the streets. Why is it that a government, such a rich government, how come you don't provide for these elderly people the support and recognize their contributions in the past? Rich Hong Kong today, and Hong Kong today with full of vigor, actually is all due to the contributions made by the elderly people. And they didn't have any MPF, so why don't you provide them with universal pensions, honestly? What we are arguing today is about how senior officials have collaborated with the business people. Well, it's just collusion between officials and the rich. Let me put this in a serious manner. The government today can only be described by 4 words. Is actually a government that should go to hell. It has totally ignored the public. I can't tell you professional views because I'm not educated. I can't give you professional terms. I can't teach you anything. I'm not able to teach you anything because I don't have much data or much education. You can speak to me in English. I have no idea what you're saying. If you speak in English, I'm totally lost. But elderly people like me, they actually have contributed so much to Hong Kong's development and richness today. So why is it that you can't think of a universal pension scheme? The government should go to hell. Next one. Many have said the same thing. People like me, I hope that you won't have a hatred against the rich. I'm not really being hateful against the rich. I'm just a small owner. The government asks us to contribute 5%, and they contribute 5%. Our understanding is that later on, if my business falls or if I die, then they will be protected. And yet, we won't have to worry about the protection for the staff. We won't need to be worried about having to find $2-3 million to pay for my staff. Okay, some of them have worked for 30 years or more than 20 years. If I don't understand or if I don't have offsetting, then I would have to find reserves. Miss Tam, if you haven't got any reserves and you contributed 5%, then you should give them their retirement protection. I'm willing to do the work. I'm willing to open the business. Then I will have reserves without paying government tax and getting millions of dollars when I'm getting old. So I think that's fair and fair. And also, I believe that the government has done its work. I do believe it's done its job. I do respect the government. But the plan proposed years ago made me feel anxious. I'm contributing additional $200-300 every month, not more than the 5% indeed, with the original intention that, say, by 2008, if they lost in the MPF, whether it's high risk or low risk, they chose the high risk investment when they retire years later, then I could have offered them better protection still with my additional contributions. But now when I'm retiring, you ask me to shoulder additional $2-3 million. That's unfair because that's not the original intention, not what I understood earlier on when I tried to be a conscientious employer. The latest proposal, even I were to draw a line asking them to sign a contract, we're forced to sign contracts with my staff for 2-3 years. Even if I want to be a good employer, the government's plan made me an unscrupulous one, so I don't want to do that. So the only thing I can do now is to close my business. I'm near retirement age, but my staff cannot retire yet. I just want to cook the meal together with my staff so that young people can enter the field, but I can't do that. But I hope that people don't hate the government nor the owners of small and medium-sized enterprises, because otherwise, most of them actually have tried to be good. Otherwise, we wouldn't have provided the jobs for so many staff. Next one, please. Ms. Zheng, Florence Zheng. I heard the speech by the secretary earlier on. I thought it was C.Y. Leung speaking because what he said was so similar to what Mr. C.Y. Leung has said. And he was saying that the latest proposal was very difficult, was achieved with much difficulties. So are you asking the employers to give employees less money so the employees can contribute more? I don't know why. After the policy address unveiled the proposal, now you gave us the same proposal without any change. Just then, a student from Baptist University mentioned about the cases there concerning the security guards and also there were cases of staff being owed their severance pay, and there was a case at Zheng Guan O Hospital as well. I'm sure there are a lot more cases. With the implementation of NPF, we've seen many similar cases, but the government has turned a blind eye to them. Now we've talked so much about offsetting, and at the last minute, C.Y. Leung proposed this latest proposal. If you're not sincere, why don't you just leave it to the next administration? You know that anyway, you know that CY likes getting away with what he had promised, like universal pensions. Okay, whatever was in his policy address was not implemented in the end. So here we must reiterate the stance of a coalition or joint alliance that we must strongly condemn the government for taking the lead in exploiting labor rights. Severance pay and non-service payments, the one-third of them, the calculation of one-third of them, now have been changed to one-half. Employer could clarify later on, about their stance on the latest government's proposal. And secondly, on the government's point that cancelling MPF, there needs to be a line to be drawn, I find that actually very detrimental to labor rights, because the offsetting of MPF should be applied to everyone, and they should not be divided into two parts. Even if you said there are very good employers here, but this actually, all employers show the responsibility for this chaos caused by the government. The government is obliged not to take the lead in curtailing labor rights. I need to strongly condemn the government for that. And also, for any other proposals put before us, they should not violate the principle of non-exploitation of labor rights. And fourthly, sorry, your time's up. Last point here, we are opposed to the government when in 2015 it says that it will need to reserve $5 million for the $50 billion, and then going back on this word now. Thank you. Next one. Severance pay and non-service payment. How can they be seen to be of similar nature to retirement protection? If they're similar, then, well, they're different of nature. They are different natures, after all. Is it that if I have been laid off, then does it mean that I have retired as well? So the secretary was just reading out his script in that show, and the government is giving us $7.9 billion. Don't say that. Well, look at cable TV, look at Cathay Pacific and Hong Kong TV, which because of a lack of license have also laid off staff. Offsetting to the employers, then that it allows employees to get money early on. Well, people feel sorry for any for death, but we are talking about having justice to employees. Long service payment and severance payment are the immediate compensation given to staff when they are laid off. So they're not the same as retirement protections. I don't see how they overlap with each other. So I found that what I'm doing and what I'm contributing and my work is one in which the employer is accumulating or making contributions to compensate me when I'm sacked. So, but that's different from retirement protection. Having offsetting means there's no retirement protection. Chen Kin-chung said out of $100, the labor only lose $20. But why should laborers lose $20? Therefore, we are opposed to any sort of curtailing of labor rights. I don't understand why CY Leung had to rush to make such a decision. Next one is Mr. Chung. Thank you, Chairman. I'm strongly opposed to any sort of the government's helping the employers exploiting workers. The workers are in a tough situation, and yet the government is helping employers to lay off their staff. So isn't this government unscrupulous? I think most unscrupulous is the government. Workers, when they are laid off, after they work from when they're young, and they are entitled to severance pay when they're laid off. And yet the government says that they would change the proportion from 2/3 to 1/2. That's a actually backward step. So the workers and to the families, that would have a big impact on them, because they lose 1/3 of their contributions and the pay. So where can they get the money back? So why is the government not backing workers? That is, to increase from 2/3 to more, rather than reducing the amount to exploit workers. So I don't agree with that. I strongly object to that. And I also like to remind labor representatives that whether it's the unions, labor sector, or electrical members, I think they should not ignore workers' rights. They should not compromise, because if they have compromised, then they would become sinners and unforgivable. Thank you. Next one, Mr. Chen Kai-fu. Good morning. I'm a member of the blind union. I'm almost 70 years old. I'm getting the government's disability allowance less than $2,000 a month. I'm making a few points here. I want to say that for people like me who are blind and disabled, they hope that the government can implement universal protection ASAP. We worked before, but as we get older now, if we continue to work, the employers definitely they won't hire us anyway, because we cannot walk properly. So where can we work? But right now the government is rich, and yet it's not returning the money back to the public. Instead, it has spent a lot on white advent projects. The CY Leung promised a fund of $50 billion for universal pensions, and yet is not using the money for dedicated purpose and use the money for other purposes. So we're very angry with that. Why is it that of the $50 billion, I mean, the government has the money, why the government doesn't use that money? And yet use it for other purposes other than what it promised. When we go to work, where most blind people will be massager, and when you're old, you don't have the energy to do massage work. Young people can do that, but once you get older, you can't do the work. So if there's universal retirement protection, then for elderly people or older workers, that will be very beneficial to them. And then we would have a dignified old age. We urge that the government, as soon as possible, implement universal pensions. There are 5 pillars for universal protection, and yet the government removes the first pillar, which is universal. It's supposed to be universal, not like just alleviating poverty and so forth. All those really pointless measures. Why don't you create a universal scheme? The business people pay tax. They said they pay tax, but when we worked, we also paid tax, and the money had all gone to the government coffers to the tune of $1 trillion, more than $1 trillion. And now the government is not willing to be generous. Why can't the government give more money, dedicate money to universal pension scheme, so that the old people will all benefit and be having retirement life with dignity? And with all the elderly population, many of them are sick and have lots of illnesses as well. Next one is Ms. Chu Moon Chun. Cancelling the offsetting mechanism cannot replace universal pensions. The World Bank proposes 5 pillars for retirement protection. MPF is the second pillar. you need to protect the disabled and home carers, and that can only be a supplementary measure. It cannot replace the first pillar of universal pensions without means test, and which can definitely protect a basic living for all elderly people, including the disabled and families who have lots of expenses, who have to take care of old people and so forth, so that they would not need to go through a means test, and allow elderly people to live a life with dignity, and they can also combat poverty. We are opposed to the government using $50 billion universal pension fund to use it for cancelling the offsetting mechanism, and to spend money or put money into the other benefits. I think the government should spend $6.2 billion out of the $50 billion fund. Well, we opposed to the $6.2 billion subsidy for a 10-year period during the transitional period. But I think retirement pension is a different matter. We are opposed to the government using the $50 billion fund. It should instead set up a seed fund with dedicated money, $100 billion. We urge the next administration to set up a cross-departmental committee to look into implementing universal pensions. It will be a tripartite, universal pension fund with tripartite contributions, and there will be a surplus of $160 billion. And because the latest proposal made by the government will only lead to tax increases after 10 years, and they can also lead to a removal of OALA. We need to have a pillar that does away with means test. But if you have means test that would cause disputes within a family, you need to also means test actually is insulting, and also can lead to labeling effects, and it's also a disrespect to people who are caring for their home family members, and also penalty for people who have worked hard. The proposed offsetting mechanism measure, or the proposed abolition of offsetting mechanism, is not a good step. You should spend money on offering protection retirement, and the money contributed should not be used to offset contributions. If you draw a line and also do away with the offsetting arrangement, it will lead to losses to workers, and it will also lead to dismissal of workers who have worked for a certain number of years. So sorry, your time's up. Next one is Mr. Chu. Good morning. I'm Chu Shipun. I'm a member of the Universal Pension Joint Alliance. I'm 91 years old now. I've worked for everyone for 17 years. But I don't know how is it ever possible for me to come back here again.
That's why I need to speak my mind today. The government has no integrity at all, because at the Alliance, I'm involved in affairs relating to elderly's rights, and I think that universal retirement protection is the fairest proposal, but the government is not helping us. It's about the interests of both sides. If we have tripartite contribution, then you're not helping the public, because we're saving a lot of money for the government if we have tripartite contribution. So you know about tripartite contribution. How about contribution from 4 parties? In 2007, the Hong Kong Council of Social Services held a meeting and invited the consortia to attend. And for consortia earning $10 million, we asked whether they can pay 1.9% more tax. And the CEO of the consortium said that they're happy to pay 1.9% more tax if business is good. So this is laying a good foundation for the government. But now the government is treating us as the enemy, and that is why I get so emotional when I talk about this government. The government is not honoring its promise. I hope that I would see this done before I die. But even if this is not done, it's for our next generation, it's for the general public, it's for all of you in the future, so that you can enjoy this benefit. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chiu. And I also thank everyone here, Ms. Lee Choi Kwan. Thank you, Chairman. MPF is one of the 5 pillars to provide some protection to workers. The government is proposing to abolish the offsetting mechanism of MPF. Then the employees in general should be happy about it. But this is built on the basis of the exploitation of labor rights. 2/3, which is the existing entitlement of the last month's wages, will be reduced to 50%, and this is taking money away from employees. If the government is determined to abolish the system, the government should not continue to allow offsetting mechanism for some but not for others, because this will draw a divide in society. As for this proposal, drawing a line, it is unfair to workers. The government should treat everyone equal, and the government should not take a progressive approach. This is only a band-aid solution. The government has emphasized that this proposal of drawing a line has the support of the labor sector. But I really want to make it clear, what labor sector are you talking about? The so-called labor sector supporting this proposal to draw a line, what labor sector is it? We have representatives striving for protection of labor rights. They should not pocket it first. They should not make concessions. They should continue to strive for getting the proposal passed, and also oppose the reduction of SP, LSP entitlement to half, because this cannot replace universal retirement protection. We urge the next administration to set up an interdisciplinary committee to implement universal retirement protection as soon as possible. Next, Ms. Lau Yi-wan. Thank you, Chairman. For many years, the labor sector have been advocating for the abolition of the MPF offsetting mechanism. The government has just made this announcement, but that according to the government's proposal, there is no retrospective effect, and we oppose that, because when the government established the MPF mechanism and enacted the MPF ordinance, the policy itself was wrong, so that the SP, LSP of employees were offset. And now the government should right the wrong, and there should be equal treatment, even for those before the line is drawn. We think that employers should take up their responsibility and pay SP and LSP to safeguard labor rights. The government has proposed to reduce the entitlement of SP, LSP from 2/3 to half of the last month's wages, which will further exploit labor benefits. We are not going to agree to this. The government's doing reveals collusion between the government and the business sector, and they are undermining labor rights. The government's proposal seeks to protect the business sector and exploit workers. We reprimand the government. And there are trade unions and national members claiming that they are representing the labor sector. May I remind you that you should fulfill your duty and steadfastly protect labor rights. You need to hold a firm position. You should not make concession and agree with the government's proposal to sacrifice our rights. I want to finally say that abolishing the MPF offsetting mechanism doesn't mean universal retirement protection, because MPF doesn't include retirees, housewives, and the disabled. We strongly urge the government to implement universal retirement protection as soon as possible, so that all retirees in Hong Kong, having contributed to society for their whole lives, can enjoy a good retirement life. Thank you. Next, Ms. Lau Yao Chen. I'm from the Industrial Relations Institute. I understand that there are over 100 deputations who would speak today. I think that the majority of them will agree to abolishing the offsetting mechanism. So we don't need to discuss that. We should focus on the principles that we should consider. After the MPF offsetting mechanism was established in year 2000, we have seen the dire consequences of the imbalance between employer and employees' rights. It's been a decade, and we're finally facing up to this issue. There's been a huge delay. This policy in itself is wrong, and the government should shoulder its responsibility to right the wrong, and the government is providing a subsidy for the employers. We don't oppose that, but the ratio would be reduced from 2/3 to half, and before the line is drawn, the MPF contributions will continue to be used to offset LPs, LSP and SPs. It's unfair to older workers. For the labor sector representatives, you have maintained your position of 2/3 entitlement, but not having retrospective effect. Well, just now the CTU proposed that before the line was drawn, the government should provide full subsidy, whereas after the line is drawn, the government should provide half the amount as subsidy. I think that we can discuss this principle whether you agree to it or not, but we don't think that employers should be able to sack employees at zero cost, because it would cause an abuse and mass layoffs. And we have also heard the representatives of the SMEs on the plight of SMEs, but we believe that over the past 6 months the discussion has been insubstantial, because there are ways to lessen the burden of SMEs. For example, the government can subsidize SMEs earning profit below a certain level, and a fund can be set up similar to the PWIF protection of wages against insolvency fund. There hasn't been sufficient protection for the labor sector. I am worried that since the CE would like to finish his report card, the administration would just continue with this wrong approach. This has been the objective of the labor sector for many years, but this has also become the excuse for the government not to implement universal retirement protection, because this is the second pillar of retirement protection, which is totally different from the first pillar. It should not be used as a substitute. Next, Mr. Chung Hao Ping. Thank you, Chairman. I'm 78 years old. I'm old. I arrived in Hong Kong at 17, and I all along have been a worker, and I contributed to Hong Kong. Now I have nothing. Well, originally, abolition of the MPF offsetting mechanism doesn't affect me because I have nothing anyway, but I still need to speak. because the government should put workers first instead of favoring employers. Well, for the Hong Kong SAR government, C.Y. Leung, the chief executive, has done nothing. He hasn't honored any of his promises. Standard working hours, MPF offsetting mechanism, universal retirement protection. 60% of people are in favor of the universal retirement protection. Carrie Lam consulted the public 5 times, at least 5 times, and there is 60%, over 60% support for universal retirement protection. Even Stephen Sui, the secretary, attended consultation sessions, and he understands that the majority of the public so consulted, 60%, are in favor of universal retirement protection. So why isn't the government doing this? Because we are elderly people, we do not have savings, we are incapable, and there is also the disabled as well as housewives. Are we just waiting to die? If we had money, we wouldn't need the government's help. But then we don't have money. Are you telling us to wait in our dotage? Just wait till the old people die and that's it? I demand that universal retirement protection be provided as soon as possible. For the $50 billion, C.Y. Leung, and if I may put it this way, appropriated or stole $50 billion because it's supposed to be a dedicated fund for universal retirement protection. And the government used the $50 billion for other purposes. Can C.Y. Leung have all the say? Thank you. Mr. Tam Lai Chung. In 2017, in C.Y. Leung's policy address, C.Y. Leung proposed abolition of the MPF offsetting mechanism, and it will be done in a progressive manner. However, the SP-LSP entitlement would be reduced, and there will also be a 10-year subsidy from the government to employers. As far as our concerned group is concerned, we're disappointed in the government for continuing with the government proposal. There has not been any adjustment, and according to the labour sector, there has not been any consultation before pushing through the government's proposal. So this is a preconceived stance of the government. The concerned group is very concerned about reducing the SP-LSP entitlement. And we are concerned about the lack of retrospective effect, because they will be affected before the line is drawn, and they will stand to lose. LSP and SP is a protection for workers. And the payments are supposed to help tide workers over difficulties. But the government is favoring the business sector. We requested the government abolish the offsetting of MPF against SP-LSP, and we also oppose the calculation of SP-LSP entitlement. And for 80,000 home carers, the disabled, grassroots workers, they don't stand to benefit from the government's proposal. So you are not implementing universal retirement protection. Point number 5, in 2015, in the budget, it was said that $50 billion would be reserved as pension fund to deal with abolition of the MPF offsetting arrangement and for enhancing the old age allowance for the elderly. Next, Mr. Chen Hock-Fung. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I want to explain that our organization supports abolition of the offsetting arrangement and implementation of universal retirement protection as soon as possible. The Gini coefficient is standing at 0.539. The wealth gap is getting wider, and this government doesn't honor any of its promises when it comes to abolishing offsetting arrangements, standard working hours, and universal retirement protection. The government hasn't honored any of these promises, and we're disappointed. Apart from implementing universal retirement protection, we should bear in mind that it should come with a condition. You should not help the business sector without any condition imposed because you're favoring the business sector. Just now, a deputation from the business sector made this point, and also from the business sector over the past few months, they have been suggesting that after the offsetting arrangement is abolished, many companies would fold. I wonder if this is really the case. Does it mean that all along the companies have been exploiting their employees in making a profit, and if they fold up, we should not have any sympathy if that is the case? And there should not be anything in the law that allows them to have the offsetting arrangement, because it shows a problem with our system. MPF seeks to provide basic protection to the general public, but there is a loophole, so we should follow the original legislative intent. And also from the business sector, it is said that the business environment would be affected if offsetting arrangement is abolished, and the business sector would be affected, and the consequence is catastrophic. And I think that this is scaremongering, because the business sector also said that implementing the statutory minimum wage would cause the economy to collapse. Again, this is scaremongering. And it is said that the business sector has shown the greatest sincerity. They're going to pay an additional 1% as contribution. So my question for the business sector is that if you are so sincere, will you agree that there should be retrospective effect, and also the entitlement should be kept at 2/3 of last month's wage? We as workers, we face oppression from consortia. For example, we have no rent control in Hong Kong, and I think that the SMEs should stand on our side. And Mr. Felix Chung from the Liberal Party and other representatives from the business sector mentioned that abolishing the offsetting arrangement is easier than implementing standard working hours, etc. So the government should implement this as soon as possible. Next, what is meant by fake consultation with preconceived stance? What is meant by lip service? CY Leung yesterday demonstrated these once again. And when I was on the MTR, we were holding the newspaper, and everybody criticized the government because there is retrospective effect, and the government is favoring the business sector.
Okay, after all those playing to the gallery, well, what has the government done? And the business sector also made some remarks. I think they're confusing the public. So what's meant by retirement protection and what's meant by dismissal compensation? So if you're not an employer, you don't have to think about it. Is it what you think? Well, I'm not going to repeat the remarks that have been said. All I'm saying is that the business sector should not be exploiting everything, because they have been making huge profits. So this is not just about labor disputes. The administration also has an unshakable responsibility, because in the 90s, we were close to reaching an agreement on the Central Provident Fund, and yet the administration just stepped back, and then you introduced the MPF and said that it would be a replacement. So the administration has not done its job, and then the business sector is trying to exploit everything, and then the workers are short-changed. So it's like the short power incident. So how are you going to make things work? So for the retirement protection, well, we don't have the most important element. So we have to have universal retirement protection. So let's focus on this. let's not just look at the offsetting arrangement. We have to look at the retirement protection issue. How are we going to resolve this problem? Okay, on this occasion, the administration is trying to make use of public money to try to remove this so that hopefully the MPF mechanism will work. But then we don't think that is the case. So this term of government is coming to an end. You only have 7 days to go. Well, with the new term of government coming in, we hope that universal protection will once again become one of its agenda items. So we have to have universal retirement protection. We have to have tripartite contribution. We have to have the entire community getting involved before we can resolve this problem. Instead of adopting this band-aid approach, we should adopt a comprehensive approach. Next, Ms. Chow. Well, I think the offsetting arrangement has been a problem since the introduction of the MPM mechanism, and now the administration finally admits that it's a problem. So it shows that during all those years, the administration has been condoning to the practice by the employer, and yet the administration has not really done anything substantial to resolve the problem. Well, for the improvement mechanism, there is no retrospectivity, so the administration is favoring the employer. So it is making sure that the employers will be able to save money and cut corners. So are we still trying to be enemies of the workers? And you're also trying to adjust downwards the existing entitlement from 2/3 of the last month's salary to half of the last month's wages. Actually, for the workers, what kind of logic is there? And also for Matthew Chang, he also said that he would be prepared to spend part of the $50 billion fund to subsidize the employers, and this is to replace the introduction of a universal retirement protection. This is most ridiculous. You might not have time to pay attention to some of the minor news. All right, some 300 security guards working for the Baptist U. Well, they've been laid off, and their severance payment will be offset by the existing offsetting arrangement. So the outsourced contractors do not have to pay any cost. Actually, they do not want to pay anything. And the workers try to get the help from student unions and also labor unions. That's why they managed to get some assistance. So employers will not stop exploiting. In fact, they will continue to be greedy. And as a social studies or social welfare student, well, it might be far away from our retirement, but still, we can be one of them. And therefore, we have to be mindful of these labor issues, and we will continue to pay attention to that. If the administration does not take up its responsibility, we will continue to argue and negotiate with officials here. Thank you. I'm a social work student. Well, by the end of 2016, some $32 billion has been offset under the arrangement, and under the existing system, well, it's one of the important pillars of retirement protection. But then if it's offset, if a worker is dismissed or laid off, then he'll not be able to accrue any benefit under the MPF mechanism, and it's going to be reserved for the employer in laying off employees. And other than the remarks made by other speakers, in fact, we also have concrete examples, because in 2012, for a female worker in a housing estate, because the contractor has not been able to renew her contract, she had to be laid off, and several $1,000s were paid to her, and then she was hired again by the next contractor, and in total she managed to get some $20,000 as severance payment, and of course that has been offset under her MPF account. Together with the administrative cost, she was only able to get some $20,000 by the time she retires. So how can it be enough? And therefore you can see that there are many elders who prefer to work after retirement. So for the offsetting arrangement under the MPF, it's like a bug in the system. So for the CY Leung government, well, shortly before their term is coming to an end, they try to be very resolute in trying to come to a package under the offsetting mechanism. But then the proposal has been a step back rather than a step forward. It's a retrogressive proposal. That's why it has been the basis of our discussion today. With regard to the calculation formula, from 2/3 of the last month's salary is going to come down to half of the last month's wages. So that's in exchange for the proposal to scrap the offsetting mechanism. This is unacceptable. What if Mr. Sew's pay is cut by 1/4? So you said that they would only be receiving some $25 less out of 100. And well, given the fact that you're highly paid, it doesn't really matter. But then for a low-income earner, if you're going to receive 1/4 less, then you're actually talking about a very substantial amount. How can that be acceptable? And also, employees have been subjected to exploitation by their employer. Why can they not get their severance payment and long service payment? And why should the community be taking this up? In fact, they've been working very hard and they've been doing their job, and therefore any cap that is to be introduced, that is acceptable. But then if you're going to take it away, you're actually exploiting the workers. And with an aging community, we should offer better protection to the employees upon their retirement. And for the scrapping of the offsetting arrangement and also the introduction of universal retirement protection, I think those are right things to do. Thank you. Next. Well, in the light of the announcement made by the administration last week, we already submitted our latest proposal. With regard to yesterday's announcement, we haven't yet been able to come up with a response. I'd just like to reiterate our stance at the multi-party meeting. With regard to the offsetting arrangement, I think the biggest benefit is not for the workers. I think it's the administration that is benefiting, and the administration can subsidize the can subsidize some of the employers, but not all. Well, whether it's to be paid by the employers or the government, anyway, the employer has to pay their workers. And also for MPF protection and also employment protection, they are both very important. That's why the severance payment and also LSP, we cannot do it at the expense of LSP in order to scrap the offsetting arrangement under the MPF mechanism. We are against the reduction of the cutting back of the entitlement from 2/3 to half of the last month's wages of the worker, because if the employer is not required to pay upon sacking their employees, then there will be no employment security for the workers. That's all I'd like to say. Thank you. Next, Mr. Yao Kam-wing. Thank you. With regard to the proposed arrangement to scrap the offsetting arrangement, we have about 3,000 restaurants and our members are free to express our views. And when it comes to the existing MPF mechanism, it's not able to provide comprehensive protection for workers, and therefore the system should be enhanced so that by the time when workers retire, they can get proper protection. I think many people have criticized the system because the administrative cost has been extremely high, and the fund managers often choose portfolios that would be highly risky, and therefore the administration should regulate them properly so that MPF will be able to play its role by protecting the workers upon their retirement. Well, we're talking about over 200,000 workers in the catering industry, and most of the employers are SMEs, and the administration is going to spend some $7.9 billion to subsidize the employers over a 10-year period. Still, it's not enough. We will have to set aside enough reserve for that, and that would add to the cost of employers. And if employers are not able to afford that, they would consider closing down or even going into liquidation. Then if employees cannot be protected for laying off, then how can they get retirement protection? And if cost is likely to go up, then the return period can be even longer, and employers might just decide not to expand their business or just close their business, and that would also stifle the economic development in Hong Kong. And in the end, there would be waves of redundancy, and in the long run, employers would just turn their employees into contract staff. And the administration would also have to consider the proposal by the 5 chambers of commerce. In any case, whatever proposal is put in place, the administration must make sure that there would be grace period to make sure that employers' contribution would be properly protected and exempted from this. Next, unscrupulous employers. Well, are there that many unscrupulous employers? So please do not try to create labor disputes. Well, from the beginning, MPF has been a deformed embryo, because when I look at my MPF account, well, since the start of it, I only managed to accumulate about 10% in terms of growth, so it won't be able to protect my retirement. Well, recently we have heard that there is a new proposal, and then for the SME employers like us, we do not agree to the different proposals. All right, many workers have complained that there are unscrupulous employers, and for the 20-day entitlement is going to be cut down to 15 days. In fact, well, over a 10-year period, what kind of help does it offer to employers? It's just 50 days, so it's slightly more than a month. So I'm really grateful to them, and you're actually putting us into an unenviable position. All right, we have heard a 90-year-old complaining that he's fighting for the interests of elders, and the administration should feel very embarrassed. In fact, our government should think about this. Given the huge surplus that is sitting on, it should be more bold, so that it would be prepared to come up with something that would benefit the elders upon their retirement. We should protect their retirement. So I think the administration needs to reflect on itself. It should offer more comprehensive protection, and both the employers and employees have been affected, and they have been pitched against each other. I think we should look at the long term. Okay, you say that during the first 10 years, you will still be allowed to offset, but then after the 10-year period, that will be scrapped. Well, to the employers, that is not going to be a good thing, because many employees have been working for them for 20, 30 years. Okay, during the last 20 years, they will not be permitted to offset. So you're talking about 400 days of wages, and the employer will have to take it up. Would that be fair? I think for this term of government, okay, whatever you said yesterday is not going to be meaningful, because as C.Y. Leung put it yesterday, the new term of government has all the right to decide what it's going to do. I think you will have to work hard to create better benefits for our workers and employees, and then even for us SME employers, we will not be that mean. We will not. We don't really mind paying that extra 5 days to our workers. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Seal, the Bureau Director, and good morning, everyone. All right, we are familiar faces. We know one another well. But then I don't think my remarks today will be palatable to your ears. Well, as far as our chamber is concerned, we have reservation about the abolition proposal put up by the government, because you're going to affect all sectors of the community. For the transportation sector, we will be hard hit, because for the car repair workshops, we are actually working in hard times, and very often the main repairman would also be the employer, and they are not able to afford to hire many workers. And if you scrap the offsetting arrangement, then the SME's cost will go up even further. As a result of that, some small enterprises will have to close down, and we can only work for the larger repair workshops, and the cost would be very high, and the operating cost will go up even further. So that would also add to the cost of the transportation sector. Well, our general union has been there for a long time, and for the taxi Trade and the PLB Association, well, the drivers would suffer because all of us are working as self-employed, and if cost keeps going up, then a lot of the jobs will be outsourced. So in the end, it's the grassroots workers who will suffer. We don't want that to happen. We don't want jobs to be outsourced. From what I can see, this is going to happen, and it's inevitable. So for the Taxi Trade Association, yes, we only have a dozen or so members, but then we have already set aside more than $1 million as our reserve. And if you were to scrap the offsetting arrangement, then as far as our chamber is concerned, we can only outsource some of the jobs because we simply cannot afford it. At present, the business environment is unstable, in particular for the taxi paging service. The business is unstable, so we are just SMEs. So think about us. Think about our chambers of commerce. We need to talk to our workers. We need to discuss the things and sort things out. Yes, I'm from the Cleaning Association, and I've heard the students say that there are some jobs that have been outsourced by hospitals and universities. And very often, when the contract expires and when the contractors change, we workers will be affected, and sometimes we cannot get the severance pay or long service payments. So upon the expiry of the contract, we might be forced to become self-employed. In my view, this new proposal will be even worse for the workers. We don't know whether or not the administration is aiding and abetting the employers or robbing the poor to pay the rich. So I have grave reservation about the government's proposal. So you're actually aiding and abetting the employers to exploit the workers, and you're robbing the poor to pay the rich. And some of the businessmen representatives have already expressed their sentiments. Is it really the right way to go? Apparently, they are also not in support of the government. So the administration needs to reflect on itself. Because for many of us workers, many of us are casual workers, and well, some employers might have made contributions to the MPF, and then after a while they would ask us to turn ourselves into casual workers and self-employed. So that would be bad. And for those of us who are close to retirement, our entitlement would be cut by half. Okay, you might be entitled to tens of millions of dollars, but now you're cutting our entitlement by 1/4. Okay, we might have about $100,000 as under the MPF accrued benefit, but then we would not be eligible for your higher living subsidy for the elders. So I'm really very angry about it. I don't know what the administration has been doing. So what are the senior officials doing? So I think you're trying to come up with a band-aid solution. This is not a comprehensive solution to the problem. And if you've been doing your job, well, you should go one way or another. And then it's neither here nor there.
Dr. Zhang? Well, MPF is actually an amount, imposed on people, it should be removed instead of waiting till after 10 years, when the offsetting is fully scrapped. Hong Kong government is not totally democratically elected. The Hong Kong public cannot fully monitor how the MPF is being used. And the self-employed have no retirement benefits at all. Therefore, I'm proposing that you should replace MPF with fruit money, increase the fruit money to $4,000 without means test. As long as someone has lived in Hong Kong for more than 20 years, they should be entitled to it as a sign of respect to people who have contributed to Hong Kong. Long service payments should be retained, because employers should have reserved benefits for their long-serving staff. If they cannot pay, the SMEs who cannot afford the pay, they can apply for subsidy from the government. The 10-year grandfathering or buffer period is too long. I think we should just cancel the offsetting without any retrospective effect. That is, the MPF should continue to be offset before the new plan come into place. We don't know exactly when the implementation date is, so the government can just shift its goalposts as long as it wants. So the calculation of long service payment and severance payment, you said that there used to be the proposal for 2/3 of the wages, and now it's changed to half. In other words, someone who's long served for long enough, after a line is drawn, when their wage is increasing steadily, the ultimate compensation should be lower than what is offered, what they could be entitled to before the offsetting. So the ultimate problem is that the government is not democratically elected. The public cannot monitor the operation of the MPF. The fund companies involved in MPF can just charge whatever management fees they want. In an 8-month period, the MPF management fees has risen or doubled to $9.6 billion. And when you retire, the fund management companies could say that they've lost all their investments, and you can't take them to task. And because of a lack of democratic government, even with universal pension, it could really suffer the same fate as MPF unless you exempt employees from making contributions. So we should abolish the MPF and replace it with fruit money. Thank you. Next one is Mr. Lau Chuk-kei. My first question is, C.Y. Leung, in 2012, when he was elected CE in order to appease the labor sector, he proposed progressive abolition of offsetting. But the problem is that he gave the public a false expectation, because the public thought that in the account, the money in the account would not be used by other people to pay severance pay or long service payment in the future. But the government, yesterday, when it proposed its latest proposal, it said that it has no retrospective effect. That is, a line would be drawn. In other words, if the plan was implemented tomorrow and I'm laid off the day after, then all my contributions in my account would continue to be offset. So the drawing of the line means that the MPF, the offsetting established over the past 17 years, will be consolidated. So the Hong Kong government needs to make things clear. What is he doing? And secondly, over the past 17 years, the offsetting that has happened then, well, workers do not support that, but the problem is the long service payment will be reduced to half. That would immediately cause long-serving staff to get less money than now under the current scheme in the end. So that's a direct impact on labor rights and also a retrogressive step. So for people in the labor sector, don't think that by passing a proposal, a fake plan without any retrospective effect, you don't think there is a better deal, because ultimately workers' benefits will be betrayed. And back to the issue of MPF. C.Y. Leung, he didn't really deal with the offsetting issue. Also, for other protection for retirees, he has not done much. He changed the $50 billion fund to subsidize employers when they sack staff. $50 billion. Even if you look at the financial estimates, the amount of money is supposed to be spent on retirement protection, but not to help employers subsidizing the long service or payment or service payment. So if you are not going to use the money for purposes you promised before, then how can you gain the trust of the public? So retirement protection should be launched, definitely. Next one, please. Mr. Tam Siu Sing. Thank you, Chairman. The catering industry opposes abolishing offsetting. With the minimum wage and soaring rents, most people in the catering trade have been struggling hard. Salaries are high in the catering industry, and they make up more than 40% of our turnover. If you abolish offsetting, then to the labor-intensive catering industry, it will deal a heavy blow to us. Offsetting arrangement, if it's abolished, is not as simple as you think. It really means that all the enterprises will need to put aside reserves to cope with future expenditure in long service payment and severance pay. In other words, employers will need to shoulder an extra amount of money for protection purpose for their employees. That means shifting the goalposts. We are actually seeing that the government would host a dinner, but then the bill would be picked up by employers. We have to look at our competitiveness, and the proposal would not do anything good for Hong Kong economy. Please note that right now many SMEs now in Hong Kong are struggling to survive. When the business is not so good and with a lack of cash flow, we don't have any extra cash to be put aside as reserves. If the government goes ahead with abolishing offsetting, that would be a neglect of the challenges facing SMEs. Next one, Mr. Pak Chung Ki. Thank you, Chairman. In the start, people asked us where the Lion Rock Institute was set up, but that person has gone. But let me say this again. Actually, Lion Rock Institute was set up in 2004, and they misunderstood us, saying that we tend to support business people. No, but let me clarify. Our stance on behalf of the Hong Kong Lion Rock Institute, we do support abolishing the entire MPF scheme. We support Hong Kong workers actually putting in their pockets their entire pay. Members, officials here, you may think that Hong Kong people are brainless because they kept saying the MPF scheme is good, because if it's not good, then because Hong Kong people don't know how to save. But they are the 1% of the people in Hong Kong. They think that all of the other people are like children. They tend to think of themselves as playing the role of a mother. But if you think that you are having MPF for our benefit, but what has happened to us? Every year, you can see that every year, because of MPF, workers are forced to contribute $10 billion to fund managers every year. I don't know when I'll retire, but the fund managers definitely can retire soon. So all of you who sit here, who claim to, or members who claim to protect workers' rights, you with open eyes can see that Hong Kong workers are robbed of $10 billion every year. Why can't the workers keep their money for their own retirement? I think the only result is that you're forcing fund managers to retire soon. I don't know whether Apple Daily has their staff here. Think about your work has been outsourced. That's to do with MPF too. Well, now we've got budget of $600 billion. What happened? Over the past 7 years, if you have bought a flat, the property prices have doubled. If you bought or invested in stock index, like Dow Jones Index, it has risen by 100%. Look at MPF. It can't even beat inflation. That is, with so many years after the fund has been operating, the purchasing power of the contributors have dropped, not increased. And you're saying that people have complained the MPF charging fees are too high, and the government said that they will have a central management of our funds. When I saw the words, are you talking about, I wonder, are you talking about nationalizing the funds? And every time we criticize the system, the MPF authority will say that the system will not go smoothly until 40 years later. So you are asking us to wait for 23 years until before we complain again? Well, are you asking me to wait till I'm in my 60s to be pleased with the system? So we should abolish MPF altogether. Next one. Having heard, well, I'm Mr. Lam. I'm chairman of the Inbound Travel Association. I've heard so many views. I'm the last one to speak. Well, most of the deputations here are from the labor sector. But small, medium, mini-sized enterprises indeed make up most of the companies in Hong Kong. Say, a company with like 6 people, like travel agents. So the operations of travel agents over the past few years has been very difficult. The bosses of travel agents, they are employees themselves. They just try to scrape by. The offsetting arrangement for SMEs and mini enterprises, I do have much reservation about the offsetting. All along, with my staff, we have tried to scrape by together with our employees. Besides the need to find money to pay salaries every month, to find businesses, we are also struggling to pay for the MPFs. Right from the start, we knew that there would be the offsetting requirement. So if all of a sudden we need to pay extra under the new scheme, then I think that the employers would be in a much more difficult position. The government has actually pit employees against employees because it has forced, it's not doing anyone any good. All we need to can do is to just do the calculations with my staff and then transform all my staff into contract staff and to start afresh our relationship with them, because we need to find the money. Does the government have the pool where we can make contributions to it, or travel agents should save up the money? If in the future the staff retires, then the long service payment, long service, is not the same as retirement benefit. It's the government's responsibility to look after staff retirement benefits. We, as business people, have paid taxes and made contributions. We have our budgets. But if there's a scheme that actually takes away security from us, then that's really unfavorable. Well, we never accepted the government's plan, contrary to what someone said. We never accepted the government's plan in the first place. And to us, it is a challenge. I hope the government, the new administration, would think carefully before implementing a new plan. Thank you. I think this is the end of the first session. So first of all, let me thank all of you for coming. We then will have the next session, the next batch of deputations. While people are coming in and out, I said that earlier on there's no Q&A in the first session, but let's seize the time. Wan Xiuqin, if you have time to ask, would you like to ask any questions? Because the people are coming in and out anyway now. He raised his hand before. How many have raised their hands so far? Wan Xiuqin 有個孔好啟明。唔係，唔緊要。Well, I had announced that there will be no Q&A, but Wan Xiuqin raised his hand when I announced that. We need to seize the time, otherwise I don't think we have time for question and answer in the second session. Once you can ask questions.
得 OK。
各位咁先啦，有嘅。
唔係，我想揸緊啲時間啫，因為真係 overrun 咗。
We've overrun. Okay, what do you think?
去到最尾，
算啦，冇啦，你真係你俾一個講，你俾而家講好難交代。
冇事啦，係唔講咪得。
得，尊重大家意見，尊重大家意見。
主席唔係唔講，係留翻下一節一齊講啊嘛，係咪？即係
OK，麻煩晒大家，唔該晒。
會肥咗咩？
Okay, let's wait till the next session.
你啊，
大佬啊，肥咗啊，講咗嘥時間。
冇辦法啦，係啊，啲時間好難預啊。
唔使理佢哋。
第二節啦，係啊。
我撐你。
第一節議員冇發言喎，係啊。
Okay, members are not going to speak in the first session, I think.
揸緊啲都有啲困難。好提議。係跟住第二
Second session, I remind deputations that first of all there's an earpiece in front of you. If you want to speak, if you want to listen more carefully, you can use the earpiece or you can choose a channel. Channel 0 is floor, 1 is Cantonese, 2 is English, and 3 is Putonghua. When you speak, please don't code mix for the interpreters. And also there are some matters to note for the public attending national meetings. Please refer to that. And finally, be reminded that you're not protected by the Electoral Pass and Privileges Ordinance. That is, you're not given any protection. So let's begin. For the second session, Mr. Chen Chi-fong, 3 minutes each. When your time is up, the alarm will go off and you have to stop. Chairman, good morning. The MPF offsetting arrangement is a policy blunder. And the employer, if in the case of SP-LSP dismissal, should shoulder the responsibility. It is completely different from retirement protection. To offset LSP and SP with MPF contributions is unfair, and so far $30 billion have been used in the offsetting arrangement. So the government should take up this responsibility to abolish the arrangement. But then this proposal contains some conditions. For example, the existing entitlement of 2/3 of last month's wages will be reduced to 50%. And at my center, there are some workers who are in their 50s, and they are not given any MPF protection for the majority of their work life. And now they are going after workers over the age of 65, and in our center, many workers have to renew their contract every 2 or 3 years. And it is gravely unfair to our workers. Second point, the government's proposal has no retrospective effect, and it is unfair to aged workers. Before the line is drawn, the MPF contributions can still be used to offset the payments, which means that older workers will not get the protection. In terms of the offsetting claims, meaning that there are 1,100 cases after the offsetting arrangement. There is nothing left. That means these workers will not be given any retirement money. And after the effective date, before the line is drawn, this arrangement will still be in place for some time. Second point, the government has a 10-year grandfathering arrangement with subsidy provided to employers to cover some expenses of LSP, SP. Will this cause a bigger problem? Will there be mass layoffs in the interim? For our workers, they are the needy group in our community. They have worked hand to mouth throughout their lives, and because of the long-standing offsetting arrangement, labor rights are not safeguarded. The government instead is going to continue with this arrangement for a longer time without giving them protection. SP, LSP, and MPF are two different things, and you should come up with a genuine proposal to abolish the offsetting arrangement. Next, Ms. Lee Chi-yen. Now, about the offsetting arrangement, it's not doing any good to employers, the government, and employees like myself. For example, the government has been recruiting employees, and then the employees will be sacked. For cleaners, they earn $20,000, and then they would be sacked, and after retirement they have no protection. For the majority of workers, we have been laid off by employers. The first year after MPF was introduced, my employer laid off a dozen colleagues, including myself, under the offsetting arrangement. So how can we be given any protection? The quality of life after retirement is undermined because of the offsetting arrangement, and the employers, in order to shun their responsibility, would ask the employees to renew the contract regularly. And there are many contractors, such as the estate that I'm working in, will be subject to a renewal of contract once every 2 years. And then for the new for my colleagues, they would be sacked and recruited like new employees. So there is so that the LSP and SP will not be involved. And in fact, this is the responsibility of employees, and MPF should be retirement protection. Any employee, including myself, if eligible for SP, LSP, as well as MPF, the employer should honor their promise to give payments to the employees. The offsetting arrangement undermines the protection of workers. It also lowers the morale of workers. So how can we help the company perform better? Because of a higher risk of employees being sacked, there is a higher chance of employees getting CSSA instead. We therefore support the government in abolishing the MPF offsetting arrangement. Next, Ms. Wang Bo-Hei. According to the MPFA, from 2001 and 2016, 30% of the MPF contributions withdrawn, that is $19.599 billion, were used in the offsetting arrangement. For the MPF contributions, they may provide for retirement, people's retirement, but then when the employees leave their post, the SP-LSP would be offset by the MPF contribution. This is undermining their rights, and the government would instead of paying out LS or SP or LSP, offset that with MPF contributions. For example, there's a worker in his 70s working for the LCSD contractor, and he has already gone through 4 occasions on which the contract was not renewed. He did not have any he only got $18,000 to $20,000 because the remaining was offset by the MPF contribution, and when he retires he only has some $50,000 in his MPF account. And there is also another lady working for another LCSD contractor for many years, and because of the administrative fees and the offsetting arrangement, the MPF total balance only stands at about $20,000. So how can they maintain themselves after retirement with MPF? Why is it that for a worker in his 70s, he still has to work? What is wrong with this society? Apart from the total abolition of the MPF offsetting retirement, we should also implement universal retirement protection. Even John Tsang, the former FS, agrees that MPF cannot provide adequate protection for people's retirement, and this is about improving elderly people's lives after retirement so that their quality of life will not be undermined because of lack of income. We have 290,000 elderly people living below the poverty line, or 30% of the total elderly population. We have old age living allowance and also CSSA for the elderly, but there is means tested and not all elderly people are eligible. Whereas for the non-means tested universal retirement protection, elderly people would be able to lead a dignified life after retirement, and the burden on the children will also be lessened, and elderly people will be given basic protection. And that should also be, we should also make sure that it is financially viable in the long run. Next, Ms. Choi Wai-Fan. We hope that the government will abolish the MPF offsetting arrangement as soon as possible, because for the security guards industry, where we work on a contract basis, and once every 2 years we change employers and we sign new contracts. And every time when a contract is signed again, we will need to accept the difference, because another MPF account will be set up, and if we sign a contract with a new company, the difference will be included in the contract. So our money is being eroded. And also for intermediaries, when we sign a new contract, our employment period will be counted afresh. So every time the MPF contribution would be lessened. And I have only $50,000 or so in my MPF account. I started making contributions in 2002, but it's been 15 years. When in 2017, for 15 years, I only saved $50,000 in my account, and I need to pay $7,000 for my living expenses. That means every year I need $84,000 income, and I am 62 years old now. I can work for a few years, and if the offsetting arrangement continues to be in place for the next few years, I won't be able to save $100,000. Well, first of all, I need to pay the intermediary, and I also need to pay for the administrative fees. On my retirement, I think I will only get $60,000 or $70,000, which will be insufficient for even a year's expenses. So we are against the MPF itself. We hope that there will be universal retirement protection for our retirement. The objective of MPF is good. It should give retirement protection to us, but its implementation brings about more cons and pros, because for intermediaries they get to spend our money, so they reap the biggest profit. Next, after introducing MPF in year 2000, under the pressure of the business sector, the government introduced the offsetting arrangement. That means when LSP and SP is to be paid out, employers can apply with the MPFA to withdraw their employer's contribution to offset the LSP and SP amount. That means that the payments should come from the employer's pocket. It is supposed to be given by the employer to the employee, but now the MPF contributions can be used to offset the payment, so that employees do not get the protection they originally deserve. MPF is the second pillar of the 5 pillars of retirement protection advocated by the World Bank. The original objective is to provide retirement protection to people, but because of the offsetting arrangement and its implications, the employees' retirement protection is subject to exploitation, which is in contrary to the original objective of MPF. On the one hand, they do not get any retirement protection. In addition, for low-income earners, their livelihood would be affected. We believe that it is necessary to abolish the MPF offsetting arrangement in full. As for the LSP and SP, the objective of these two payments are protection against unemployment, so that when employees are laid off, they can cope with the living expenses for a short period of time. But under the offsetting arrangement, the employers exploit the system so that employees cannot get the MPF contributions they deserve, and this would greatly affect their livelihood. And in short, when employees are laid off or when they leave their jobs, they should be able to get this protection as SP or LSP, whereas for MPF is supposed to be a kind of retirement protection for employees introduced by the government. These two things are different in nature. It should not be confused. We believe that the MPF offsetting arrangement should be abolished in full. There should not be any proposal to draw a line. Next, Mr. Ho Kam Chung. I'm a member of the concerned group under the Catholic Pastoral Workers Center. I'd like to talk about retirement protection today. The government calls it retirement protection, not universal retirement protection. I think the administration has come up with a very good proposal of universal retirement protection. I hope that the next administration will complete this task. I am a laborer. I'm in my 70s. Hong Kong is a metropolitan city. We are prosperous. We have a stable society because of the hard effort of my previous generation and myself. 50 years ago, when we arrived in Hong Kong, when we settled in Hong Kong, we led a hard life. My parents only earn $1,000 a month, and we also needed to help our parents with other jobs. We needed to work as hawkers, and I'm grateful to my parents, and also I thank our generation for making the effort. We want to have a stable life. We support the government policies. As for this generation, people receive more education now, and times are different. Your livelihood has been improved, but I don't have much savings. I raised my children. I was unable to receive tertiary education. I have only about $100,000 as my assets. I got the public housing only after my house was torn down. I hope that this administration can help the low-income earners and also poor elderly people who have worked all their lives. We hope that the new chief executive can complete this task, and that is to implement this good policy introduced by this administration, universal retirement protection. I hope that the next administration can complete this task in 1 year's time so that we can have a stable life. Thank you. Ms. Fong Hiu-tong. I hope that the abolition of offsetting arrangement can be completed in full, not in a progressive manner, because CY Leung in this election platform already advocated abolishing MPF offsetting arrangement, and towards it, not until his term is about to end, he starts to deal with this issue. A few days ago, an urgent meeting was called for to discuss the MPF offsetting arrangement. And according to the government's proposal, $7.9 billion subsidy would be provided to employers who sack the employees. The condition is that instead of getting 2/3 of last month's wages as SP, LSP, it will be cut to just 50%, and it's an exploitation of employees. Employees already need to pay the employees' MPF contributions, and also they face the problem of their contributions being eroded because of investment blunder of the MPF trustees. Employees may also face a risk of losing their jobs, and their SPs, LSPs may also be eaten into. The MPF contribution seeks to provide protection for employees after retirement at the age of 65, but like some workers said, they only have some $50,000 in their MPF account because of the offsetting arrangement, and after the line is drawn, the entitlement would be reduced from 2/3 to 50%. Secretary, I think that you should try the more low-income earning jobs. Well, earlier for the pay adjustment for civil servants, even civil servants stood up to object. Why are you ignoring the demand of grassroots workers? For many white-collar employees, because of the folding up of companies, they are laid off.
So the SP and LSP should have been paid by the employer, because that's intended to increase the cost of laying off workers. And therefore, the administration should never have subsidized them with $7.9 billion, because that would render the workers even more helpless. Because you're thinking about the interests of the business sector. What about those who have been working very hard and contributing to our society? Last but not least, we must scrap the offsetting mechanism immediately without subsidizing the employers. Thank you. Ms. Wen? Well, I'm here Because back in year 2000, when you introduced the MPF mechanism, we already told you that it's not going to work. And then now it's 2017, you're going to scrap the offsetting arrangement. So what about the MPF system? If you allow them to continue to offset the SP and LSP with their contribution, then all our money will go down the drains. What is left to us by the time when we retire? In scrapping the offsetting arrangement, you must make sure that the contribution that we have made into our account will be left intact. You will have to take care of our retirement. You will have to take care of our money so that after we reach 65 and retire, you should have given it all back to us with the interest. You should not have handed it over to the intermediary because their charges are very high. And workers are having a very hard time because we are living from hand to mouth. And in order to make a living, we have to make a contribution, and then once every 3 years, they withdraw the money from our account by doing the offsetting. So what's left in the account? I hope that the administration will take up the final responsibility and make sure that all the accrued benefits can be handed back to us upon retirement. Thank you. Next, Kwok Wai Singh. Good morning. I'm a social work student. I'm more concerned about the drivers who are outsourced workers because they are most hard hit because their wages are very low. Most of them can only earn minimum wages and they do not have any employment benefits. And in some companies, they are not even prepared to give them potable water, and they will have to buy their own thermal pot in order to boil water. So 3 minutes will not be enough. But then I'd just like to highlight the biggest problem. That is the MPF system. Well, for the outsourced contract workers, you'll be doing the tendering once every 3 years. And if the existing contractor is not able to renew the contract, then they'll have to lay off the workers as some dismissal as a form of dismissal compensation. Under the current arrangement, they can offset that with the contribution that they make into the employee's account. In other words, the workers are paying themselves the severance payment, and that is an exploitation of the workers. I've been to some parks and sitting out area to pay visit to some of these workers, and I talked to one of the elderly women, and she's already 65 years old, and she'd been a cleaning worker for years, and she'd been suffering from work injuries, and she'd been hired by 4 different contractors, and these contractors offset their severance payment with the contribution into her account, and as a result of that, by the time when she retires, she would not have much money left, and she might not be able to pay for her medical expenses. And after working for years, they might have sustained a lot of injuries, but then by the time when they retire, with the offsetting arrangement, they might not be able to get much from their MPF account. And for this elderly woman's experience, I think that also reflects on many other workers, and that's because of the administration. Because the administration has not done its job for the hard-earned money. In the end, they would not have anything left in their MPF account, and they would not be able to enjoy their retirement. And the administration has the biggest responsibility. Under the current proposal, it is not a sincere proposal to the employees because they'll be drawn a line. And then for the elderly workers, the benefit would not be very substantial because they've been making contribution to their account for many, many years. And if you allow them to continue to offset, then they will not be able to get much upon retirement. So you should be scrapping the offsetting arrangement, and there should be no line drawn. And also the calculation formula should remain unchanged. That would be a genuine move to protect the interests of the workers so that their retirement life will be better protected, and the scrapping of the offsetting should be done immediately. There should be no line drawn, and you should be treating everybody equally. Yes, Mr. Sin. Well, for those of us who are workers, we are strongly against the offsetting arrangement. With the introduction of the MPF mechanism to the employers and and the employees, they are not standing to benefit. In fact, the one who would be benefiting most would be the intermediaries, because they are charging for administrative costs and service charges, and these are very substantial charges, and yet the administration is condoning to such practices. This is grossly unfair to the employers and employees. The establishment of the MPF is to protect the retirees so that when they retire, they can get a lump sum so that they can enjoy their retirement life. But if the MPF is used for offsetting severance pay and long service payment, definitely that would reduce the accrued benefit for the employees. That is grossly unfair. Well, universal retirement protection is one of the best initiatives of the administration, and yet the policy has been put to the back burner, and no worker has benefited from that. And if you allow the offsetting arrangement to continue, then by the time when the workers retire, how can they enjoy their retirement life? According to some workers, well, they have had 2 offsetting in their employment life, and very little would be left in their account. So what is going to be done by the administration for these workers? So for those of us who are workers, we are strongly against this offsetting arrangement. Honorable members who are from the labor sector, you've been the pioneers in our labor movement. We have 3.5 workers in Hong Kong, and their aspiration, their voices, you should have heard them. And they'd like you to support them. They'd like you to defend their interests till the very end. You should be standing by the workers. You should be standing by the grassroots. You should be accountable to the 3.5 million workers in Hong Kong. Recently, Baptist University security guards have staged a strike, and many of the initiatives have targeted the workers, and the MPF offsetting arrangement has shortchanged us for 17 years. Should this continue? So what are you, honorable members, going to do for the workers in Hong Kong? We don't want to hear people say that you should take a step forward. Why don't you pocket this first? Why don't you just drink this half glass of water? But then what about the grassroots and the workers? We don't want this kind of news. Thank you. Mr. Tam Kong Shun. Chairman, I represent the China Tourist Association, and I'd like to express my views on the offsetting arrangement. Well, in the policy address in 2017, the Chief Executive proposed that there should be a phased approach in scrapping the offsetting arrangement. Well, after considering the proposal, we are against the proposal by the government. We have 3 main views. First, the original offsetting arrangement has been working well, and both workers and employers know what to do. Well, the employment ordinance has already put in place the offsetting arrangement, allowing employers to offset their severance payment and LSP with the contribution that they make into the workers' account. Back in 1995, when the MPF ordinance was enacted, the administration allowed the employers to offset the SP and LSP with their contribution into the system, and that has been working well. Both employers and employees have been doing that for decades. And if you do not consider the affordability of the employers, and if you do not strike a balance between employer and employees' interests, and if you try to stir up trouble by scrapping the arrangement, that would only give rise to some adverse consequences, and that would only worsen labor relationship, and that would destabilize our society. Second, you would be increasing the burden of the travel agencies. Some agencies might have to close down because this has to do with the agencies' interests, and that would affect their day-to-day operation, and that would also hugely or substantially increase their operating costs, because most of the travel agencies and our members are small are SMEs, and the burden would be very substantial. Given the current operating environment is very difficult already, we have to open up new resources, and we also have to make savings. And if you just scrap the offsetting arrangement, some travel agencies will increase their cost, and as a result they will have to close down, and that would affect employment and also tarnish the reputation of Hong Kong as a tourist destination. Unemployment rate would also go up, and that would destabilize the community. So with the proposal to scrap the offsetting arrangement, the operators will try to resort to ways to cut corners in order to ensure that the companies will continue to stay afloat, and they will try to lay off staff. And in some cases, they might be taking extreme measures. For example, they might ask their employees to work part-time or become self-employed. Thank you. Next, Ms. Choi Sin-man. Thank you, Chairman. Well, the Hong Kong Women's Centre has been concerned about women's interests, in particular those grassroots women, and we've repeatedly pointed out that by scrapping the offsetting arrangement, that would only help improve the protection for some grassroots workers. It cannot replace universal retirement protection. Well, our workers' bargaining power would be very low, and they've been exploited, and they are also faced with unstable work, and many of our members are working for Chinese restaurants because the employers need to refurbish their premises, and they would be laid off, and very often they would just change their names, and then the employees would be re-employed. And as a result, because of the offsetting arrangement, their MPF accrued benefit would be undermined, and after several such offsetting, very little will be left in their account. And because these women are homemakers, and many of them have to work part-time, and they do not have many choices, and they are very helpless when they are laid off. So there are some grassroots whose wages are very low, and they do not have job security, and therefore they are very helpless. And our response to the proposal by the administration yesterday is as follows. First, we are against the reduction of the entitlement from 2/3 to half of the largerman's wages, and also for the $550 billion fund, part of that will be used to subsidize the employers. Well, in simple terms, the MPF is just a very meager or minimum retirement protection, and for those who are not employed, they would not be protected under the MPF mechanism. And this is just forcing people to save money so that when they are young, they would turn their consumption into savings for their future use. That's why the MPF mechanism does not have the resource reallocation purposes, and there is no chance that you can share the risk under the mechanism. That's why for those working poor, in the future they might also become poor elders, and we're also having this problem of many women living in poverty, and the problem would only get worse. In simple terms, the current MPF mechanism cannot resolve the problem of elderly poor. That's why we urge the administration to set up an interdepartmental mechanism to introduce a universal retirement protection system. Next, Mr. Leung Chi Wai. Well, Chairman, I'm representing the Modern Management Catering Professional Association. We are against the proposal to scrap the offsetting arrangement because the system has been there for a long time, and under the employment ordinance, well, the employers have to make contribution into their employees' MPF accounts, and then at the time when they have to lay off the workers, they can offset the severance payment or LSP with their MPF contribution, and only where the administration allow them to do the offsetting were they prepared to support the administration's proposal to introduce MPF. And now you're proposing to scrap it, and still you're insisting the employers to continue to pay SP and LSP. So how can the administration expect the business sector to support that? Well, in Hong Kong, the catering industry has been faced with a worsening operating environment. You should not be increasing the operating costs for the enterprises, or else it's like adding frost to snow. And in the catering industry, you have to be pragmatic. And if you just offset it by ignoring the interests of the business sector, in particular the difficulties encountered by the SMEs, and if you make them pay, if you want them to shoulder higher cost, then we would find it unacceptable. Thank you. Next, Mr. Kwok Wing Kin. Well, good morning, everyone. The Labour Party's views are very simple. In this year's policy address, C.Y. Leung said that he would be coming up with this proposal to scrap the offsetting arrangement, and a line will be drawn, and the workers' entitlement will be reduced from 2/3 of his last month's salary to half. And the government will also be sharing part of the expenditure by subsidizing the employers, and that was already announced in January, and 5 months have gone by. And by yesterday, in fact, during the past few months, what has the administration done? The Labour Party is strongly, the Labour sector is strongly against the proposal to lower the entitlement rate from 2/3 to half of the last month's wages, and yet the administration still insisted on passing it intact through EXCO. It shows that at the time when C.Y. Leung joined the election campaign, he tried to get the support from the Labour sector by making this pledge, and now at the end of his term, he's trying to honor his pledge by coming up with this proposal. Well, we have to stress that the offsetting arrangement at the time of introducing the MPF already was done at the expense of workers, because of the function of SP and LSP would be entirely different from the MPF, and why would they be allowed to offset the SP and LSP with their contribution to the MPF? And the administration is now trying to remedy its problem by sacrificing the interests of the workers by lowering the entitlement of the workers. I think is repeating its mistake, and we are strongly against anything that would undermine the interests of the employees. So we have actually come up with a proposal that is the employer should make a contribution to a fund, and that would help the employer to offset the SP and LSP that they have to pay when they lay off workers. So whenever they need to resort to the laying off redundant workers, they can use the fund to shoulder part of the cost, and yet they will still have to shoulder half of the cost, so that that would serve as a disincentive. So in this case, the administration only needs to inject $20 billion, and what the employers will need to pay is 0.5% of the total wages cost. So including Felix Chong from the Labour Party, he's prepared to support it, and Mr. C also said that this pool money can be considered. Well, in the long run, we believe that severance pay and LSP should not be reduced. The administration should not pressurize the workers into supporting it. Next, Ms. Ng Wai Ling. Well, I'm glad to hear so many views from the speakers. I hope that Mr. Stephen Tsui and members will genuinely listen to our voices, because we are wage workers and we are having a hard time already. And if you scrap the offsetting arrangement, we have talked about that for a long time. And I believe that when you throw out this proposal, Mr. Tsui, you must have been to many places listening to workers' voices. Well, we never expected you to come up with this proposal without making any modification yesterday. So this is really disappointing to us.
And the proposal, by changing the calculation for severance pay from 2/3 to 1/2, that is the last month's wages, that's actually going backward on the employment ordinance. Even though you said that the MPF would offset the MPF contributions would not be offset. But for someone who start working in her 20s and by the time she's 65, only when can she get the MPF? And from the 20s to 65, she could have been laid off or company wound up, and there could be lots of offsetting. So to understand, if you are dismissed and your severance payment covers your immediate needs when you are just laid off. So now if there's 25% less times your years of service, then the amount itself would not be much. But that's what a person needs to survive. They may need the money to survive. There's so many jobs right now, like teaching assistants, under so much workload to the extent that some even commit suicides. There are so many staff with emotional problems. The pressure is huge, and it's immediate. So I never thought I would need to wait till 65 when I can get more retirement benefits. And the MPF has been in operation for 17 years. Does it offer really a good protection for retirees? You haven't told me how great the scheme is. So now that means that you are going backwards on the employment or actually having a retrogressive step. When it comes to the employment ordinance, you consulted the business sector and you tried to get a compromise. So why do you always have to appease the employers? Why do you have to wait for them to nod their head before you go ahead with the plan? And your dedicated fund of $1.2 billion, now you said that you raised it to $9.7 billion. So shouldn't you use the money or put it into the Retirement Protection Fund instead? Next one, Mr. Ng. I'm representing the Neighborhood Workers Association. Yesterday, when the administration proposed the offsetting of MPF scheme, I think it's really cheating people. Because on the surface, the government claims that it would help the employees, but indeed it's biased towards the employers and interest groups. I think this is just a last resort by Stephen Leung to try to look good before he departs from the administration. He said that the next administration can amend the latest plan, so that shows that the current administration is not sincere about resolving the offsetting issue. I support abolishing offsetting, but the 15 transitional period for employers and the $7.9 billion subsidy, I think all these are biased towards the business sector at the expense of workers. I agree. Cancelling offsetting, but I don't support cancelling severance payment and non-service payment. Workers work day and night for decades. They have made contributions and they need to be given some sort of protection. Even for people who retire at 65, many of them still continue working. Earlier on, there was a 80-year-old cleaning worker who collected copper boxes on the streets. So offsetting the MPF cannot really help the retirees and those in the grassroots. Therefore, I support having a universal pension scheme and also abolishing the offsetting of MPF. And yesterday's announcement by the government amounts to little. It's not really a solution. And the reduction from 2/3 to 1/3 is a de facto wage reduction, and the government and the employers has the right to redraw the line. So employees really have no say. Thank you. Next one. Mr. Chairman, I'm from the Security Guards and Property Management Association. We've been fighting for the benefits of the sector. The offsetting of MPF results in lack of protection for retirees. We strongly urge the government to abolish the offsetting mechanism altogether, so that there's more protection for workers when they retire. There are lots of labor disputes now. Often, the disputes involve service payment and non-service payment. So if workers have contributed to MPF, the laborers or employers can deduct their contributions, service payment or LSP from their contributions to the MPF account. And particularly now the government has outsourced so many of its jobs. When a contract expires, workers are dismissed and then new ones or they may be re-employed. This results in the continuous reduction of years of service of workers, so their contributions to the MPF accounts have been offset time and again. So this is like the amount of money is like a reserves for employers who want to dismiss their staff. So the government, back in May, at the consultative committee with the laborers' unions, unions strongly opposed the government's plan to cut 2/3 of the wages to half. The calculation method itself really is unfair, and the labor sector would not accept it. Why? Because the government is subsidizing the employer sector with $7.9 billion. So the employers have the money, but they don't want to give the money to employees. But indeed, employers does have resources. So why should the government subsidize them? But for the grassroots, with the limited MPF money to support the retirement years, when they have $10,000 or $30,000 left, when they want to apply for the OH allowance, the government would say, well, tell them to use up their savings first before applying for the OH allowance. So it's like the government is concerned more with the employers than the employees' interests. So our labor unions, I think that the workers and the labor sector across Hong Kong would oppose the government's plan. We want to maintain the 2/3 as the basis of calculation for service payment and non-service payment, so as to benefit the retirees more, give them more protection. Next one, please. Progressive abolition of the offsetting arrangement. That's the hope of many workers. The FTU is pleased to see the government's proposal promise to progressively abolish the offsetting of severance payment and non-service payment with employees' mandatory contributions. But the government's proposal initiated that the calculation for SP and LSP will be reduced from 2/3 of wages to 1/3 of wages. And then the employers propose 1%, additional 1% contribution to get in return a drop or the cancellation of the plan to abolish offset. This is really infuriating to workers. FTU hope you understand that workers are entitled to get reasonable returns from their hard labor. They're not greedy. And lately, the business sector has been actively calling for the additional 1% contribution to MPF, and they even said that that can benefit 3 million workers immediately. But if you look at the proposal carefully, the proposal is a sugar-coated poison. Severance payment, long service payment times 2/3, which is like 67% of a monthly wage, and the employee's contribution currently only makes up 5%. A year can accumulate 60% of contributions. So if the employers dismiss staff, they have to make up for the 7% shortfall. But on the basis of the proposals by the employer, increase of additional 1%, then the contributions would come to 72% a year. So employers, when they dismiss staff, they will not need to make up for any shortfall. So ultimately, the employers or the business sector's proposal will only reduce the cost for laying off staff and delay the government's schedule in abolishing the offsetting mechanism. And 3 million workers will not really benefit, and the proposal will only create a false illusion. We had a consultation committee at which all the labor unions urged the government to abolish the offsetting mechanism ASAP, and neither should they reduce the level of wages for the calculation of SB and LSB. So I hope that the incoming chief executive, Carrie Lam, can treat the labor sector the same way as she did when she was contesting in the election. The labor sector has a consensus. We now await Mrs. Carrie Lam to walk with us and to provide for the 3 million workers what they had hoped for. That is a plan to abolish the offsetting mechanism. Next one. Having heard from so many deputations, I feel that the labor and employer sector have failed to have any consensus when everybody is opposed to the current plan or scheme. So why should the government rush into a decision? And the government is providing a $7.9 billion to subsidize employers. That comes to $3 billion a year. In 2 years, the money will be used up. So does the government has any backup option? What will happen after that? What will they do? When the money is used up, what will happen? So a society with money, with surplus, and if there are rich business people with profits, then shouldn't they, if the business people are making profits, then shouldn't they allocate part of the profits as profits tax so they can continue to there can be continuous investments in the fund? Wouldn't that be a better solution? Because in the future, from what I heard, the employer and employees are looking at the issue from their own perspectives, so they cannot reach any consensus. The government then should step forward and get the rich to contribute more to the society. Small, medium-sized enterprises are struggling hard. So I know the laborers should be understanding, be sympathetic about the limited profits made by SME owners who are not really making a lot more profits than them. So we should not be biased towards any side, saying that, well, the employers are making so much money. But indeed, many are small operations and the profits are not that big. So there should be mutual understanding on both parts. But the government can consider using profits tax, making good use of profits tax. Next one. Mr. Chen, let me express my stance here. We support abolishing the offsetting mechanism, but the government's plan changes the proportion from 2/3 to half. We are opposed to that. We hope that the LegCo can amend the employment ordinance, because with the MPF scheme, over the past 17 years, I've seen many short-term contracts that last like 18 months. Under the employment ordinance, severance payment can only be discharged when someone has worked for 2 years. So under the employment ordinance, for paid leave, someone who's worked for 3 months can get pro rata provision for a bonus or double pay, plus the 3-month probationary period. After the end of the probationary period, and then 3 months of continuous contract offers some sort of protection. I hope that LegCo can amend severance payment amend provisions on severance payment to 6 months. That will provide better protection for the laborers, because you can see that, like professional drivers, particularly those who ride on green buses, minibuses, many of them are aged over 65, but their employer would not create a MPF account for them because they're aged over 65. But all the contracts they've signed only last 18 months. Even if they are to work for 5 or 10 more years, when they ultimately retire, they have got nothing in return. So I hope that the LegCo can really amend the employment ordinance, particularly the provision on severance payment. Who will be eligible for SP? The best is to have 3 months, if not 6 months. So therefore, staffers aged 65 or above, they have some sort of protection. Thank you. Next one is Mr. Yao Yuxing. The current administration has less than a week to go before it ends, and it's dealing with the offsetting issue too late. Now it's like to force upon us a plan and cut 2/3 of the wages to half in its calculation of severance payment, and that really would greatly undermine the retirement benefits. And it's also setting a date, effective date, and using $7.9 billion to subsidize the employer sector. We cannot support that, and we're very disappointed. The latest plan cannot address our concerns. On the other hand, I feel that the employer or the business sector's attitude on offsetting is retrogressive. They only care about their own benefits. They've kept exploiting workers' rights to retirement protection. The employers are willing to add 1%, an extra 1% of contributions, but that cannot resolve the issue. We are strongly opposed to accepting the employer's additional 1% contribution in exchange for abolishing the offsetting, because even with an extra 1% to the MPF contributions, that will only allow the employer to have more reserves, and when they lay off staff, they will have had huge reserves. Ultimately, the employer would not need to make up for the shortfall. So I urge the business sector to face up to the issue of offsetting. Ultimately, I hope that the new administration can provide a more reasonable plan and urge for the instant abolition of offsetting. Next one, Mr. Fong. The current administration has only a few days left. The current secretary sitting here will no longer be the secretary in the next administration. Neither will remain with the Labour and Welfare Bureau, so I have no expectations for him. I hope you can make it clear that this topic today on retirement protection, it shouldn't be discussed at this subcommittee on abolishing the offsetting, because offsetting should be seen separately from retirement protection. Long service payment is a recognition for the fruit of labor of workers. When the government launched MPF, and then came up with this offsetting idea in a collusion with the business sector, many have mentioned the harm of that. Right now, even now, the government is only thinking about how to appease the business sector and then trying to come up with a solution to sort of claim that it has fulfilled its election promise. But ultimately, it's a case of business people having all the say. Look at universal pensions. The academics and many people have talked about how it's feasible and how that can still be surplus in 2064. The incoming chief executive, Carrie Leung, that is the former chief secretary, when she was on the commission, on poverty. So what does the government think of retirement protection? It doesn't really regard retirement protection as a right of Hong Kong person. Why is it that senior officials, including the chief executive Sima Leung, who's stepping down, how come that they're not offering retirement protection but only offering benefits for the friends in the business sector? This is not just.
When it comes to retirement protection, it's about fairness. It's not about cost effectiveness. or efficiency. So I must emphasize once again that the offsetting arrangement should be fully abolished. This is today's agenda. We need to bear in mind the highlight of government's proposal. Right at the outset, it is devil's deal between the government and the business sector to seek to exploit labor rights, reduction of the entitlement from 2/3 to half. This is absurd. I am totally disappointed in this administration. Stephen Soy, the secretary, will not be the secretary for the next administration. We have members from the FTU and the labor sector here, and it's easy for them to convince the government. I want the full abolition of the MPF offsetting mechanism. Next, Mr. Chan. The government has hastily introduced this proposal. We are deeply disappointed. First, on the calculation of entitlement of LSP, SP, it will be reduced from 2/3 to half, and it is a huge reduction. And it is like taking 17% away. It will be a reduction from 1 million to 830,000. The calculation method should be kept at 2/3 of the last month's wages for SP and LSP. Second point, we believe that it is backpedaling for the business sector because they only have eyes on their own interests and they continue to exploit workers' rights. Third point, this administration has not been able to complete this task. We feel disappointed. We hope that the next administration can improve the original proposal and abolish the MPF offsetting mechanism as soon as possible. At the same time, we need to consider the actual circumstances because recently the media resorted to fake self-employment to dodge the issue of paying SP and LSP, and that's next media. And we need to consider the interests of 3 million employees. Next, Ms. Zhang Bolai. Thank you. About the administration's proposal to abolish the MPF offsetting arrangement for cleaners, it is total neglect of cleaners' rights in favor of the business sector. It is unfair to us. Over 60% of cleaners are now over 65 years old, and even for the middle-aged, they're usually ethnic minorities or new arrivals. According to the MPF ordinance, employers are not required to pay contributions for aged workers. Aged workers can only rely on statutory minimum wage as their income, and they can only save up for retirement when they can no longer work. Most of our cleaners work for government contractors. We have quite some cleaners in their 80s and still working because they haven't saved enough. And they're also afraid that when they get sacked because of their old age, they may not be able to get the severance payment in full because the company has not made contributions to the MPF accounts, and they can only rely on the severance payments as retirement money. Many companies at present try to dodge the responsibility of SP by cheating workers into signing resignation agreements and renewing their contracts. Many proposals are already favoring the business sector instead of employees, and for aged workers, the SPs entitlements will be deducted. If the government really wants to help workers, you should introduce universal retirement protection. Because cleaners plan their retirement on SPs from employers. It is a shame to exploit us. We strongly oppose the government's proposal. We believe that there should not be any deduction of the SP-LSP entitlement, and we oppose such a deduction. Next, Ms. Leung Chee-yen. I represent the trade union for promoters and casual workers. Our members comprise, our union comprise promoters and odd job workers and casual workers, and women stand to be affected because they mostly work as promoters because of the lack of child care service and the need to take care of the family. Women are forced to take up casual jobs, and yesterday C.Y. Leung announced that the CN Council approved the government's proposal, which will reduce the SP-LSP entitlement from 2/3 to half of the last month's wages. Our union expresses dismay, and with so many objections from the community, the government is pushing through this proposal. It is undermining the rights of workers. Many of our members work on a part-time basis. They work flexi hours, whether or not they exceed the 418 requirement. They get no protection from the employers except MPF contributions. For so many years, the MPF contributions have become a strategy for employers to save up for the SP-LSP payments. Whereas for casual workers, they have been shut out from the safety net, and bulldozing the government's proposal is favor for the business sector and exploitation on laborers because they are the underprivileged. As for women who worked as casual workers on their retirement, they face even more difficulties. So our union would like to emphasize that we oppose the government's proposal to abolish the offsetting arrangement without retrospective effect. We also oppose the condition that the LSP-SP entitlement would be reduced from 2/3 to half, and there should be non-means tested universal retirement to take care of home carers and housewives who are not covered by the MPF system. And the government should also review the arrangement of continuous contract to protect the rights of casual workers. Next, Mr. Leung. Thank you. I represent the General Union of the Hong Kong Manufacturing Industry. First of all, the government continued to ignore objections and other views in bulldozing through the government's original proposal. We feel angry, especially the government is undermining labor rights, and the SP-LSP entitlement will be reduced from 2/3 to half of the last month's wage. We find it unacceptable. The offsetting arrangement in itself is flawed. It has totally undermined the one of the retirement protection pillars. When a worker gets old and is unable to work and must retire, originally the worker could rely on a meager sum of retirement money. Unfortunately, the worker then realizes that half of the retirement money is being eroded by way of offsetting arrangement. And so far, $31.8 billion have been eroded. We want to have retirement protection in Hong Kong. So abolishing the MPF offsetting arrangement is a timely measure. However, we cannot keep loopholes and we cannot trade we cannot use labor rights as trade-offs. About reducing the entitlement from 2/3 to half, we cannot accept it. On the calculation of SP and LSP, the method has been established and it's proven effective, and it provides protection for unreasonable dismissal of employees or as a form of compensation in the case of SP, LSP dismissals. Abolishing the offsetting arrangement is a step forward to protecting workers. We support it. We hope that it will be implemented as soon as possible so as to give better protection to workers. Thank you, Mr. Leung Yu-chung and Mr. Poon Yu-ping. Are you also members of the PWSC? Can I ask either of you to chair the meeting for the time being? Just several minutes. Because I need to go over to the other room to vote. Next, Mr. Chu Hon-chung. Chairman, members, I am the representative of the Social Affairs Committee of the Hong Kong Kowloon Labour Federation. CY Leung has decided to abolish the MPF offsetting arrangement, that is, to use MPF contributions to offset the LSP for workers. And our union is very angry about the CE's decision to bulldoze the government's proposal through. After rounds of consultation, the government insists that the SP-LSP entitlement will be reduced from 2/3 to half. This is a big step backward in terms of labor rights in Hong Kong. We are sacrificing the interests of workers. We hope that our voice can be listened to or can be heard, although the Chief Executive will step down in 7 days. On behalf of the workers, I'd like to give this check to the Chief Executive. You have 7 days in your office. Please revise your proposal so that you can really benefit all workers. And our union would also like to appeal to the next administration that the MPF offsetting arrangement should be fully abolished, and that the SP-LSP entitlement should be calculated in the same way, that is 2/3 instead of half. I say once again that the offsetting arrangement should be fully abolished, and the calculation of 2/3 of the wages should be kept. The deputations with this session have spoken, so I open the floor for members to ask questions. Mr. Silping, 3 minutes, questions and answers included. Chairman, I thank the deputations for coming here to express their views. We received over 70 deputations. I think the view of the labor unions is very clear. About the government's proposal announced yesterday, we all feel that the labor sector's views have not been heard. The labor sector yesterday issued a response telling the government very clearly that we find the original proposal unacceptable. Just now, the Secretary referred to the paper, paragraph 3. Although there is no consensus between the employers and employees, the government still considers that it is this administration's responsibility to take the lead, and that's a grand word, to make a decision which we find beneficial for all in society. I'd like to hear your response to the views expressed by the deputations. If neither side accepts your proposal, how are you going to take this forward? How can you so-called take the lead? And yesterday, the Chief Executive also said that the next administration can make its own decision. Well, you are still Secretary for the coming few days. So what is your plan for taking this proposal forward? If you don't have a consensus, even if the proposal is tabled into the Council, there is no way it can be passed. I don't understand. You have had months of consultations with the trade unions giving you a lot of views, and yet at the end of the day you just continue with the original proposal with no change at all. I think the majority of deputations have said that if you reduce the entitlement from 2/3 to half, it's backpedaling, and the government should continue to find ways to seek common ground. I still have some time left, Secretary. What's your response? I'll be brief. Just now, some deputations suggested that the government has introduced a proposal hastily. I want to emphasize that in considering the issue, several years ago we have been discussing the issue at the Commission on Poverty. And one major concern is MPF offsetting arrangement as we discussed the pillars of retirement protection. Different views have been expressed, and we have incorporated these views in the consultation document. After 6 months of consultation, we have thoroughly considered different alternatives, and in this year's policy address we have come up with a specific proposal. And after that, over the past few months, we have been very proactive in discussing the proposal with different stakeholders, including the employers and employees. And apart from just discussing the proposals, we have also very carefully and seriously analyzed different alternatives, including the views of different parties. And we've also shared those alternative options with both sides. Apart from the government's proposals, I must say that at the moment, so far, no other alternatives have been accepted by both sides. So for the remaining term of this administration, at this stage, we need to analyze different alternatives, and we consider that the original proposal floated by the government is the best option comparing to other alternatives. There is no perfect solution. We believe that our effort has not been wasted because we have analyzed data and different alternatives, and we believe that the research and analysis will be very conducive to taking things forward. And on the original proposal, at present we consider it to be the best option. So we believe that this will form the basis for taking things forward. As the incumbent chief executive said, of course the next administration can make its own decision as to whether to take this forward at all or to adjust the current proposal. Mr. Poon Siu Peng, would you like to come up and chair the meeting for the time being? Mr. Leung Yu-jung next. Secretary, you kept saying that this proposal is the best option so far, but the problem is, I think you've also heard that when you promoted this proposal, the labor sector is very astonished. You are undermining the labor rights, and you still call it the best option. I think that the government is totally shutting the eyes and ears as you bulldoze through this proposal. So my question is, on what basis do you think that the labor sector has accepted this proposal of exploiting labor rights? On what basis do you claim that there is support from the labor sector? First point, I'd like to clarify that this proposal is not exploitation of labor rights. Please not just focus on 2/3 of the entitlement to half. This is the adjustment made on the basis of abolition of the offsetting arrangement. But we need to bear in mind that for the long service payment, it is a bit of overlapping with the MPF contributions.
Well, I can just give you a simple example, okay? Under the existing arrangement with the offsetting arrangement, let's say an employee is earning $15,000 a month. Well, how did you think that the labor sector would be prepared to support it? You're talking about retirement protection. So if you're going to cut it back from 2/3 to 1/2, then how can you say that they'll be making more? So under the original legislation, we've been exploited and undermined by allowing them to offset such payment with the contribution. Then how can you say that there is no reduction in our benefit whatsoever? So which is more, 2/3 or 1/2? Well, Chairman, let me clarify the situation. You should not be singling this out by saying that it has been cut back from 2/3 to 1/2. So it's about whether or not we're able to scrap the offsetting arrangement, because at present there is this offsetting arrangement. Once it can be kept, once it can be scrapped, you'll be able to keep all the benefit in your account and you'll still be able to keep the SP and LSP. But then you're trying to curry favor from the employers and yet they are not accepting it. So why do you bother to do it? So you're just trying to curry favor from the employers and yet they are not prepared to accept it. No, we are not currying favor from the employers. We have done objective analysis. We can see that there is overlapping, and if you ask the employers, they are actually asking that this proposal be scrapped altogether. We can see that there is some overlapping, but not entire overlapping. That's why, well, on the premise that we have to scrap the offsetting arrangement, we believe that this payment can be adjusted downwards, so we can keep all the contribution by the employer in the MPF account, and at the same time the employees will still be entitled to SP and LSP. That's why we believe that that's an enhancement. Well, nobody will be prepared to accept what he said. Okay, I'll leave it to Shu Kao Fai. So you can ask for 3 minutes. You can have 3 minutes. Well, Chairman, actually during this session and the previous session, we have many deputations coming to say that there are many unscrupulous employers out there, and apparently they are actually offsetting all their contribution in the employees' account. In fact, before the introduction of the MPF, Hong Kong's labour legislation did not offer any protection for workers, and that's why at the time when there is any closure of business, there is no protection whatsoever. That's why they introduced the MPF mechanism. So on the one hand, we would be mandatorily saving some money for the employees' protection, and in the event that the enterprises have to close down, that sum of money can also be used to tide the workers over during the difficult period. So that's the original intention. Okay, by now some friends think that the concept no longer applies, and therefore saving is saving. Well, you often talk about taking away the money from the MPF accrued benefit. All right, assuming that they have to lay off staff. So where has the money gone? So is it that the employer has pocketed the money, or is it that the government has pocketed the money, or is it the money has been given to the employees? So I don't think it's right to call it offsetting. In fact, they are withdrawing the money prematurely. Well, we believe that Hong Kong citizens should be entitled to retirement protection. But then it's for the entire community to think about it. Well, I've heard a gentleman, I think it's Mr. Kwok Wai Sing, and you said that for outsourced workers and cleaners, okay, there are some companies who would be signing contracts with the staff once every 2 or 3 years, and if they are not able to get their own contracts renewed, then they will just close down their business, and then they will sign a new contract with their workers. Okay, so this is not good. But then we have to separate the two accounts. Saving is saving, and then there are loopholes under the current mechanism, and they are trying to lay off staff by closing their companies. So how do we compensate the workers? How do they offer some relief to them during this difficult time? I think these are policy matters. And the two things should not be confused. Mr. Sui, I know you work very hard, and C.Y. Leung has only 7 days to go before the end of his term, and he's trying to honor his pledge. I respect that. But then, as you can see, this at the meeting today, in this council, whether it's the employers or employees, well, for anybody here representing the labor sector, everybody is criticizing you. So from this, you can see that nobody is prepared to accept your proposal. So in coming up with this proposal, you will have to think twice. Okay, you've used up your 3 minutes. All right, Yu Si Wing has been walking in and out of the meeting room. And there are also another group of deputations. So Yu Si Wing, 3 minutes for you. Thank you, Chairman. As we all know, well, for the SMEs and micro enterprises in Hong Kong, they account for some 90% of the total number of companies in Hong Kong. As far as the tourism sector is concerned, as a representative just said, the situation is even worse. So 95% of the travel agencies are SMEs, and they are already facing a lot of operating pressure. And we are faced with competition from internet, and airlines and hotels are actually marketing their services and products to their customers directly, and many of them are actually having a hard time already. And even for the senior management, they are receiving very low pay, and some of the workers have been working for them for some 10-20 years. So I think it's from the heart of their from the heart of their mind that they are telling us that the operating environment is really very poor, and yet they have to survive, they have to sustain, and a line will be drawn under the government's proposal so that there'll be a cut-off date. There'll be a cut-off date after which the offsetting arrangement will be scrapped, and for a 15-year-old enterprise, they will have to pay an employee about $100,000 if they were to lay off any of them. And if they had 10 employees, then what is going to happen? So they'll have to take out $1 million. So what can they do? They can only close their business, or else they will have to dismiss all their employees, and then they will have to sign the contracts all over again, and then they'll be able to resolve the problem of the years of service by the employees. I don't think any employee would like this to happen. So I think when you look at the issue, you should not just be looking at it from the workers' perspective. You should also look at the difficulty encountered by the SMEs and micro businesses. So what is going to happen if they resorted to this practice? Because for the employees, they will no longer want to work for this employer. The mutual trust will be completely undermined. And why would the employees bother to work for this employer? So I think the reason why the business sector is not prepared to accept this proposal is not because they wanted to protect the interests of the big consortia. Actually, they can run online business and e-business. What we have some 1,700 travel agencies, and if half of them close down, you can only have 800. I don't think you want to see the big consortia monopolizing the market. So I think with the administration's proposal here, I think there should be more consultation with the business sector, including the 5 chambers of commerce. You should not just say that a line has been drawn and nothing can be done about it. Okay, time's up. I don't think the Bureau Director will be able to respond to your questions, and no good result will come out from his response anyway. Okay, so we have other deputations who are here. So let's take a break, and then we'll come back again at 12:50. Thank you.